Chapter 2090. As long as I'm here, don't even think about hurting the celestial arch. Chang'e knew that heavenly god Black Mist was very strong, but she still stood firmly in front of the sky arch and spoke in a cold voice. The celestial emperor listened to these words and looked at the incomparably graceful figure in front of him, and for some reason, he felt a little emotional. He didn't expect that he, a dignified heavenly emperor, would actually have a time when he was protected. Moreover, he was being protected by a woman. The celestial arch was a little disgruntled with this in mind, and he could only bring out another divine pill from his storage ring before stuffing it into his mouth. Rumble. The majestic medicinal power exploded in his body, quickly recovering his injuries and the strength in his body. This divine pill tastes quite good. The celestial arch nodded with satisfaction. For normal Tao integration stage, super mighty figures, they probably wouldn't even be able to find a single divine pill in their storage ring. However, to the celestial arch, it was only a consumable that was of a slightly higher caliber. The celestial arch was the founder of the celestial court and had ruled over the kingdom of the 9 states for such a long time. His cultivation base might not be able to progress any further, but his wealth could definitely keep up. The celestial arch felt like, in terms of wealth, he was comparable to some gods of creation. Aside from that nouveau riche and Lin, there was definitely no one in the entire kingdom of the 9 states who was richer than him. The medicinal power of the divine pill was very strong. The celestial thearch's depleted energy began to be rapidly replenished. When Empyrean god Black Mist saw this, his expression grew even more solemn. One Chang'e was already very difficult to deal with. If there was another celestial arch, then she would also face great danger. Now, he could either retreat or find a way to break through the situation of his teammates. She wanted to see which heavenly god could finish off the enemy as soon as possible and then join her battle. Only then would she be able to kill the heavenly emperor in one fell swoop before he could recover from his injuries. Sigh. We came in high spirits, thinking that our enemies were just clay chickens and pottery dogs that we could easily destroy. Only after we truly began a fight did we discover that our enemies aren't like what we imagined them to be. Up until now, all of our people have died. Instead, we are the ones in trouble. Empyrean god Black Mist shook his head and sighed, his gaze moving between the 2 remaining Empyrean gods. The heavenly karma god was still being battered by the black and white spirit snakes, and no one knew how long it was going to last. On the other hand, the eternal heavenly god seemed to have reached a decisive moment. The eternal slaying spear slowly pierced into the eternal heavenly god's chest. The eternal heavenly god had been desperately trying to free himself from Ao Xiaowu's control with the eternal spear. However, he then diverted a portion of his power to his 18 arms, materializing eternal swords of 18 different elements that stabbed toward different parts of Ao Xiaowu's body at the same time. It knew that instead of fighting Ao Xiaowu for the eternal slaying spear, it would be better to use a lethal attack to force Ao Xiaowu back. At such a close distance, there was no way Ao Xiaowu could control the spear while dodging its attacks, because he had diverted some of his energy to attack Ao Xiaowu. Ao Xiaowu took advantage of this opportunity to stab the eternal heavenly god even deeper with the eternal killing spear, causing the eternal heavenly god to tremble in pain. However, the eternal Empyrean god did not panic because everything would be worth it. As long as Ao Xiaowu retreated, it wouldn't. Chi chi chi. The sharp blade pierced into his flesh and blood splattered everywhere. Countless flowers of blood appeared in the eternal heavenly god's vision. The eternal heavenly god was dumbfounded. In the face of 18 terrifying eternal swords, Ao Xiaowu did not choose to retreat. She merely tilted her head to the side to evade a lethal strike aimed at her head. However, her other arms, neck, chest, abdomen, and legs were all punctured by countless blades. Blood instantly stained her crimson robe, making it appear as if she were a blossoming red flower. This woman, did she have a death wish? Just as the eternal heavenly god was thinking this, the spiral slaying spear stabbed into his chest again. The sound of his body being torn apart was accompanied by an indescribably excruciating pain, and the eternal heavenly god was suddenly struck by the urge to howl in pain. Ao Xiaowu had taken advantage of the eternal heavenly god's distraction to unleash another ferocious attack. The eternal heavenly god understood now. It wasn't that Ao Xiaowu didn't want to live. She wanted to kill him. Only by going all out would she be able to seize this final opportunity to defeat the eternal heavenly god. Ao Xiaowu had always been aware of this fact. She knew that if she was forced to let go this time, then the eternal heavenly god definitely wouldn't give her another chance to do so in the following battles. This was her last chance, so no matter what, she had to hold onto the eternal killing spear. No matter how severe her injuries were, she wouldn't let go. The eternal heavenly god was in a panic. He had underestimated Ao Xiaowu's determination. The eternal slaying spear slowly pierced into the stone statue's chest. Ao Xiaowu's entire body was trembling uncontrollably. The eternal sword was still embedded within her body, as if it were a divine weapon that would never dissipate. It was unleashing its power in a frenzy, destroying her body and causing her power to plummet. Her intricate features were scrunched up, and she was clearly still in a deep slumber, but she was in extreme pain, as if she were having a nightmare and could wake up at any moment. A lot of hope was ignited in the eternal heavenly god's heart upon seeing this. Hold on. This Dragon Tribe woman wasn't going to be able to hold on for much longer. As long as she woke up, or as long as she lost all of her blood, then victory would be his. The eternal heavenly god actually wanted to stab Ao Xiaowu a few more times, but he really didn't dare to disperse his power. He was afraid that Ao Xiaowu would stab him to death with the eternal slaying spear before he could do so. This was a soundless battle. Unlike the earth-shattering battles of the other heavenly gods, this battle was exceptionally quiet at this point in time. It was as if the two of them were in a standoff. The only thing that changed was the killing spear in eternal heavenly god's body, which was slowly moving. Even though this battle was soundless, it was far more dangerous and exciting than a normal battle. The eternal heavenly god didn't know if the sleeping Ao Xiaowu was nervous or not. However, he was extremely nervous. Ao Xiaowu's entire body was drenched in blood, and both her vitality and power were constantly slipping away. Her attacks had also become sluggish, and it wouldn't be long before she didn't even have the power to continue stabbing with the eternal heavenly god. The eternal heavenly god felt like he could win, but he needed to add a few more tricks to establish the foundation for victory. How could a sleeping person wake up? One was pain, and the other was noise. If pain couldn't wake her up, then why not make some noise? It just so happened that the eternal heavenly god didn't need to expend much of his power to make a noise, so he could use the least amount of power to inflict the most damage. This was definitely a perfect experiment. Thus, the eternal heavenly god spoke. Boom, 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 rip. An earth-shattering boom erupted, like the sound of fingernails scraping against a blackboard. The most terrifying sound in the world erupted. Sure enough, Ao Xiaowu's brows were tightly furrowed, and a pained expression appeared on her face as her entire body trembled uncontrollably, as if she had fallen into a nightmare. It was working, and it was working extraordinarily well. The eternal heavenly god was ecstatic. Yeah. Ao Xiaowu let loose a wail of anguish, and her eyes abruptly opened. There seemed to be boundless rage, indignation, and frustration in her eyes as boundless power surged from her body, and she stabbed the eternal slaughter spear in her hand forward with all her might. Boom! The crimson spear punctured the eternal heavenly god's body, leaving a lethal trajectory that stretched for close to 500 kilometers in the air. Squeak, squeak, squeak. The eternal heavenly god was still whistling noisily. Crunch, crunch. The eternal heavenly god moved for the first time, and his head drooped as he stared blankly at the punctured body. Chapter 2091. Ao Xiaowu's eyes, which were filled with boundless rage and indignation, gradually regained clarity. However, her face was still filled with displeasure. She glared at the statue in front of her and said calmly, "Disturbing someone's sleep. Who doesn't get angry when they wake up? Morning temper?" The eternal heavenly God suddenly seemed to have understood something. It looked at the furious and aggrieved woman before it with an exasperated expression. Could it be? Could it be that you borrowed the power of your morning temper to unleash that power? Ao Xiao nodded. That's right. I have a hidden skill, which is that when my hack mode is forcibly disrupted or I'm woken up from my slumber, I'll be able to unleash all of the accumulated power within my body due to my negative emotions. This is known as the power of waking up. Eternal heavenly God. What the hell? Power of morning temper? Was there really such a thing? The eternal heavenly God had the urge to throw up blood. In the previous battle, any change in power would affect the outcome of the battle, which meant that his sudden inspiration had accidentally unleashed the last of Ao Xiaowu's power, thereby becoming the final straw that broke his back. The eternal heavenly God's body trembled as if he had just swallowed a pile of *T. What the hell had he just done? This was no longer just drawing legs on a snake. This was a King self-detonation. Huh, you're crying? Ao Xiaowu turned to the eternal heavenly God with a surprised expression. The eternally motionless statue actually had 2 streams of turbulent liquid flowing down from its eyes. It looked like it was about to converge into a river. No, this is just flowing water. The eternal heavenly God refused. Ao Xiaowu. Crack, crack, crack. The flawless divine halo above the eternal celestial God's head, which looked as if it would never change even after the passage of countless years, suddenly began to crack uncontrollably. It wasn't like the divine halo from before, which only had a single crack, after which the crack stopped growing. It was like a falling domino. Pulling one hair would affect the whole body. Starting from the smallest, it would increase in number and number, until it was directly heading towards destruction. No, I can't die like this. The eternal heavenly God's body trembled with emotion. However, his efforts could not prevent this from happening. The eternal Empyrean God was indeed invincible to a certain extent, but once his eternal state was broken, when eternity was no longer eternal, only death awaited him. The eternal heavenly God roared as he pounced toward Ao Xiaowu, trying to kill the severely wounded Ao Xiaowu as well. However, in the process of its attack, its body was rapidly disintegrating at a speed visible to the naked eye, and then it turned into particles of light and dissipated. By the time it reached Ao Xiaowu, its body had already disappeared. It had completely transformed into a gust of fierce wind and disappeared from heaven and earth. The wind swept Ao Xiaowu's disheveled hair, which was stained with blood. She just stood there quietly, her blood-stained clothes fluttering in the wind. I finally won. A vibrant smile appeared on Ao Xiaowu's face, but there was a hint of poignant beauty in her vibrant smile. Everyone says that the dragon court of the eastern seas is a disgrace to the primordial dragon tribe. Now that I've killed a heavenly god, who can say that my Ao dragon tribe is weak? The surrounding cultivators were already cheering excitedly. All sorts of gazes of reverence and fanaticism were directed at the delicate woman in red. Being able to kill a near-invincible heavenly god was enough to stun the entire Eastern Front. A smile appeared on Ao Xiaowu's face as she tried to continue battling. However, she was struck by an unbearable sense of dizziness, and her body swayed slightly before her vision fell into darkness. How dare you kill the eternal heavenly god? I'll send you to your death right now. A Heaven Pioneer stage great general let loose an enraged roar as he tore through the air atop his flaming celestial sword and flew toward the unconscious woman in red. At this moment, another peerlessly powerful saber projection fell from the sky before striking the great general in an extremely brutal manner. The great general raised his sword to defend himself, but the terrifying saber projection instantly shattered his flaming celestial sword before slamming him into the ground along with his sword. A true god with monstrous battle intent appeared before Ao Xiaowu. You'll have to ask for my permission first if you want to kill her. A man with 3 of his eyes open spoke in a cold voice. Even though he was severely wounded, he was still standing proudly. That's right, he was true Lord Erlang of the Celestial Court. Erlang Shun had thought things through. If he couldn't mess with a heavenly god, then he would go and take care of the Heaven Pioneer stage great generals on the battlefield. He was going to give these arrogant great generals a taste of the wrath of the war god of the Celestial Court. Heavenly Goddess Black Mist was completely terrified upon witnessing everything that was unfolding. At this moment, Chang'e's attacks rained down upon her in rapid succession. Bursts of pure power of the moon exploded between heaven and earth, creating an extremely dazzling sight to behold. Heavenly Goddess Black Mist retreated over and over again as she endured Chang'e's attacks. It wasn't that she was afraid of Chang'e. To put it more accurately, she was afraid of this battlefield. Heavenly God Donglong had died of exhaustion. The heavenly space god had been slammed to death by the moon. The eternal heavenly god was courting death, and the heavenly karma god was being pummeled over and over again. It looked like it would be difficult for them to turn the tables. In the worst-case scenario, they might even be pummeled to death one after another. Only she had a slight advantage. However, if the Celestial Arch managed to recover his full strength, how was she supposed to fight this battle? Did she have to rely on a divine heaven stage, heavenly human like her to turn the tables? If she activated her 9 divine halos and unleashed her maximum power, there was a chance that she could defeat Chang'e and the Celestial Arch. However, there was a very important problem, and that was she didn't want to die. All divine heaven stage, heavenly humans with 9 divine halos were definitely going to die. In reality, most heavenly gods would choose to activate their 9 divine halos without hesitation, even if they were going to perish. They were willing to sacrifice themselves for the sake of the heavenly Tao and for the sake of victory. However, Empyrean God Black Mist was different. She was still protecting him very well. I can't die yet. I can't die now. Heavenly Goddess Black Mist's dead fish eyes were filled with determination. My power of darkness belongs to the heavenly darkness god. I haven't even seen him, so how can I die here? Besides, even if I activate my 9 divine halos, there's a very high chance that I will still lose this battle. The young woman heaved a forlorn sigh as she made some calculations in her mind. In the end, she seemed to have made some sort of decision as her crisp voice erupted throughout the entire battlefield. All heavenly human tribe united army, heed my command. Cease your attacks and retreat. Heavenly Goddess Black Mist's voice spread throughout the entire battlefield. The heavenly karma god stared at the young woman with incredulity. He then turned to look at the ferocious black spirit snake and white spirit snake, then at the astonishingly powerful Chang'e and the Celestial Arch, who was recovering in secret before gritting his teeth and issuing command. Retreat. Everyone retreat. The command of the 2 heavenly gods shook the entire battlefield. The Kingdom of the 9 States United Army was trembling with tears of excitement. They had won this Eastern Front defensive battle. Chapter 2092. The heavenly human tribe, united army of over 70 million, immediately began to retreat upon receiving the heavenly god's command. However, the remaining 30 million soldiers of the Kingdom of the 9 States United Army chased after them. They knew that the retreat of their enemies was the best opportunity to retaliate. This was also the best opportunity to capitalize on their victory. Heavenly God Black Mist and Heavenly God Karma protected the heavenly human tribe united army as they retreated. The Celestial Arch, who had recovered a portion of his strength, also joined the fray. He chased after the fleeing heavenly human tribe united army with devastating might, killing one powerful being after another. The eastern front of the heavenly human tribe united army was rapidly dwindling. On the central front of the Tai Chu continent, outside Yutong City, the previously ferocious undead army suddenly began to fall to the ground, turning into ashes that were even smaller than dust. The fifth heaven and earth destruction melody, reincarnation, was gone. It hadn't been broken by the enemy. Instead, it had lost its effectiveness. This technique was simply far too powerful. If it continued to be used, the heaven-crushing United Army would suffer a terrifying backlash. As such, they were already at their limit. Even though the fifth melody had ended abruptly, the heaven-crushing United Army was ecstatic, and the Heavenly Human Tribe United Army was astonished. The Heavenly Human Tribe United Army's army of 180 million had been reduced to around 110 million. But what about the Heavenly Human Tribe United Army? They had only lost over 6 million soldiers, but they still had around 70 million soldiers. The Heaven-Crushing Alliance's losses had reached a shocking 1-to-10 ratio, and this was even in a situation where they were outnumbered. How could they not be stunned? The two sides began to draw closer and closer in numbers. The Heavenly Human Tribe United Army was quickly losing their advantage in numbers. However, the Heavenly Human Tribe United Army continued to fight with all their might in the face of such a crushing defeat. The Heaven-Crushing United Army's confidence was greatly boosted, and they fought with all their might. The battlefield had once again become a grindstone of life and death. In the western front of Yutong City, there were two bursts of energy that seemed to be threatening to tear the heavens apart, clashing with one another. One of the bursts of energy was boundless, greenish-yellow, and it was resonating with the entire boundless continent. The other burst of energy was dark and tranquil, and it seemed to be drawing half of heaven and earth into an eternal void, as if it were going to engulf everything in this world. A battle of this level would make ordinary experts feel uneasy just by looking at it. Even Tao integration stage, super mighty figures felt their flesh crawl as they looked at the battlefield from afar. This was no longer a battlefield that they could step foot in. At the center of the battle, Enlin's white robe was dyed in darkness, as if he was the ruler of darkness. Boundless darkness surged behind him. He wielded his evil-slaying sword, which was also as black as ink, and slashed it toward the heavenly earth god. The boundless darkness behind him continued to engulf the heavenly earth god, but was unable to break through the boundless greenish-yellow power. The heavenly earth god's fist was blocking the evil-slaying sword strike. The ground beneath his feet was his backing, and it was precisely because of this that his stature was so imposing that no one could compare to him. With a single glance, one would unconsciously feel their own insignificance. However, Enlin did not feel that way. Right now, he felt that he was a patch of darkness and nothingness. Whether the other party was strong or noble had nothing to do with him. If he was unhappy, he could just use the darkness to devour him. You can't hold on much longer, right? Enlin suddenly smiled as he looked at the youth standing before him. The heavenly earth god's expression became extremely dark. You're just an undeveloped darkness, and you dare to challenge me? The youth was filled with indignation and humiliation. He stared at Enlin, only to discover that Enlin seemed to have fused into the darkness, and no matter how hard he tried, he was unable to see Enlin's true appearance. No, that wasn't it. The heavenly earth god's heart jolted slightly with shock. Enlin was the darkness, and what he was seeing was Enlin's true body. His true body was the darkness. All I see is darkness. Are you going to abandon your human body in order to defeat me? The heavenly earth god chuckled coldly. We're one body, so why would I abandon it? Enlin spoke in an indifferent voice. The evil-slaying sword slowly descended, and inky black cracks began to appear on the heavenly earth god's fist. The darkness began to seep into his body. The heavenly earth god was both shocked and enraged. His invincible defense had been broken by Enlin, just like that? No, he refused to accept this. He gritted his teeth and unleashed all of his power to defend himself against the onslaught of darkness. However, the darkness was like ink that had fallen into a lake, and it continued to spread. In the end, even the clearest lake water would be stained inky black by this black ink. The heavenly earth god's power was extremely terrifying, and it could even be said that he was invincible. However, matter was boundless, and under the suppression of the heavenly Tao, the amount of matter that he could control was limited. In the face of the relentless onslaught of Enlin's boundless darkness, he was still forced to reveal an opening. The bluish-yellow energy that had taken up half of heaven and earth was quickly being corroded by the darkness. The darkness was like an omnipresent demonic claw, slowly tearing through the power of the earth and pulverizing it. "I've won." Enlin's expression was cold and devoid of any joy, as if he were pronouncing his enemy's death sentence. The evil-slaying sword in his hand slowly descended. The fist was torn apart by the black light before being engulfed. Immediately afterward, the evil-slaying sword crashed down. Whoosh! The domineering, profound, and gloomy sword intent sliced through everything before it, extending into infinity and beyond, slicing the paramount power of the heavenly gods, the sky, the earth, and the boundless void in half, extending for thousands of kilometers. The youth in the armor of the heavenly earth god still wore an expression of indignation and incredulity on his face. His armor had been sliced in half, and a black sword gash extended from his head all the way to his feet. How could this be? Alas, the heavenly earth god stumbled back a few steps. He looked on as the inky black sword gash continued to expand on his body, but he was unable to do anything about it. In the end, he was completely engulfed by the darkness right before Enlin's cold eyes. The darkness dissipated, and the earth disappeared. There was only a white-robed figure standing on the ground with a sword in his hand. The heavenly yin-yang god stared at the scenes unfolding before his eyes in astonishment, as if he had seen something extremely terrifying. Am I seeing things? The heavenly earth god has been slain. How can Lin be so powerful? The world is about to change. Heavenly sea god, what will we do? How could you? Slap. The heavenly sea god slapped the heavenly yin-yang god on the head, almost giving him a concussion. Calm down. The heavenly earth god is a paramount heavenly god with unrivaled combat prowess. Are you looking down on him by saying that he was slain by Enlin? The heavenly sea god roared with rage. The heavenly yin-yang god was on the verge of tears. He didn't want to say something like this, but the truth was right before his eyes. Why did he have to be slapped, even though he was telling the truth? It was also at this moment that the boundless earth suddenly began to tremor. Heaven and earth changed color again. Boundless green and yellow energy rose up from the cracked earth and into the clouds. It's here, the heavenly sea god spoke in a solemn voice. It's here? What's here? The heavenly yin-yang god was dumbstruck. When paramount heavenly gods are forced into a corner, they only have one chance to completely break free from their shackles and unleash their ultimate power, the heavenly sea god explained. The heavenly yin-yang god was completely dumbstruck. He had never heard of something like this, which means the heavenly earth god isn't dead. The heavenly yin-yang god asked with excitement. Of course. The heavenly sea god unleashed a shield around himself, and the heavenly yin-yang god. It's about to appear, the heavenly earth god's true form of Tao. Chapter 2093. Rumble. The sky turned a bluish-yellow color. The earth was tremoring violently. This earthquake had affected the entire Tai Chu continent. All types of natural disasters, such as earthquakes, volcanic eruptions, hurricanes, and so on began to take place on the boundless continent. Of course, the most severe natural disasters were the earthquakes. The magnitude of the earthquakes varied from place to place, but all of them were catastrophic, resulting in extremely severe consequences. The earth cracked open, the tectonic plates shifted, mountains collapsed, rivers changed course, countless buildings collapsed, and countless living beings perished. All of the living beings on the Yu Tong Divine City battlefield experienced this the most, and the ground tremored violently. The heavenly human tribe, cultivators flying in the sky, were also not safe. The bluish-yellow gas erupting from the ground was capable of pulverizing their bodies into dust. What's going on? Could this be a killing technique of the heavenly human tribe? *T. Have you ever seen a killing technique that doesn't differentiate between friend and foe? That's true. Look to the west. What's that light? Some of the cultivators turned toward the west as they let loose cries of surprise. A bluish-yellow divine light surged through the entire heavens. The night sky had already been enshrouded by the divine light, but it was now as bright as day. Immediately afterward, an even more astonishing scene unfolded. An earthy yellow god with a 9-colored armor draped over his body suddenly appeared at the epicenter of the earthquake. Countless silver stars revolved around his left arm, and he held a boundless star map in his right hand. He suddenly appeared at the epicenter of the earthquake, releasing a boundless earthly divine light. In the instant that it appeared, all of the living beings were struck by an unprecedented sense of pressure, as if they were facing the wrath of a god, and their bodies began to tremble uncontrollably. What is that thing? It's so terrifying. Is this a real god? However, its aura is countless times more terrifying than that of a normal heavenly god. The heaven-crushing united army was astonished. This god was simply far too powerful. Even though it was so far away, its aura alone was able to affect the entire Central Front. Just how terrifying was this being? I can sense it. This is the power of the earth. Could it be that this god is the heavenly earth god? How could it be? It's not like we haven't seen the heavenly earth god in action before. How did he become so powerful? Obviously, he was forced into a desperate situation and used some kind of trump card. Some return to void stage mighty figures began to speculate among themselves. When the other powerhouses heard this, although they said they didn't believe it, most of them had already agreed with this statement. If that god was the heavenly earth god, then who was it that had forced it into this situation? Was it the darkness that seemed to want to devour everything? After all, in the previous collision, boundless darkness had completely devoured the greenish-yellow power of the earth. It was clearly Enlin who was chasing after the heavenly yin-yang god. How did it become a battle between earth and darkness? A few intelligent creatures vaguely guessed something, but this guess was just too horrifying and bold, so they didn't dare to say it out loud. At this moment, a thunderous voice spread throughout the world, as if it was the roar of the heavens. Enlin, I will kill you today. The divinity angrily shouted, causing all living beings' ears to ring. At the same time, this voice shook their minds, causing them to tremble. These words were like dispelling the clouds and seeing the sun, and it caused all the questions in the hearts of all the living beings to be suddenly cleared up. Enlin. So it really was Enlin. It really was Enlin battling the heavenly earth god. All of the monks, holy martial clan, true demon tribe, and light-wing clan warriors drew sharp intakes of breath with astonishment etched on their faces. Even though it was very difficult to believe, Enlin's true identity was very clear at this moment. Why did Enlin's pursuit of the heavenly yin-yang god become a battle between the power of the earth and the power of darkness? It was most likely because the heavenly earth god had surrounded Enlin and forced Enlin to reveal his true power. This divinity, who is unleashing boundless power of the earth, as well as his undisguisable rage and vicious words, further confirmed this point. His identity had been exposed. Enlin was the heavenly darkness god. When this matter was placed in front of everyone's eyes, the shock it gave them was indescribable. The most mysterious paramount heavenly god is sect leader Enlin. No, how could my god and be a heavenly god? I refuse to accept this. I think this is great. He's on our side. We have one less bad *SS enemy and one more bad *SS ally. The higher-ups of the West Sea Alliance clearly told me that he was the super heavenly lightning god. So how did he become the heavenly darkness god? But that's fine too. He seems to be even more bad *SS now. But what if he loses control or suddenly betrays us? After all, he's a heavenly god, not an ordinary being of the Tai Chu continent. He's our enemy. Some people were quite concerned. Will the embodiment of the heavens really stand on our side? The exposure of Enlin's identity made many of the heaven-crushing United Army's soldiers very uneasy. The morale of the heaven-crushing United Army was also wavering slightly. At this moment, a voice as clear as the cry of a vermilion bird erupted throughout heaven and earth. What are you suspecting? What are you worried about? Don't forget that Enlin is fighting for the continent with everything he has. He's fighting for all of you, for the sake of victory. Su Xiaolan's words struck the hearts of all the heaven-crushing United Army soldiers like a sledgehammer. That's right. Sect leader Enlin is fighting for his life over there, but we're doubting him. This is outrageous. That's right. Now that I think about it, Enlin has done so much for the Taichu continent. He's risked his life for so many times, so what right do we have to worry about him? You don't judge a person by their identity. You have to judge how they act. Countless beings who were still worried about Enlin's identity felt their worries dissipate. So what if he's the heavenly darkness god? All we need to know is that he's on our side. He's still the supreme leader of the heaven-crushing United Army. Godin will always be my role model and the #1 war god in my heart. Now that I think about it, it's quite an honor to have the heavenly darkness god as our leader. All right, that's enough. We can't change anything with just words. Let's take action. He's fighting against the most powerful enemy. So how can we slack off? Let's fight. Charge. For the Taichu continent. For the sake of victory. All of the heaven-crushing United Army soldiers fought even more ferociously as if they had been injected with stimulants. Enlin's identity had indeed been exposed. However, even if Enlin was the heavenly darkness god, all of the heaven-crushing United Army soldiers still revered him as their leader. Chapter 2094. The exposure of Enlin's identity didn't just affect the heaven-crushing United Army. The heavenly human tribe United Army was also heavily impacted. I knew it. I knew he was darkness. Ha ha! The darkness of the heavenly Tao. Emperor Mang's hair was disheveled as he chortled like a deranged maniac. What future of the blood tribe? What blood patriarch? That's all bullshit *T. It's just a baptism by the heavenly Tao. Those who adapt will live, and those who don't will perish, haha. Emperor Fu Tian's brows furrowed in deep thought. The blood tribe is the most sensitive tribe to life, and it's exactly because of this that the blood tribe reacted so strongly to Enlin's blood. After all, the heavenly darkness god is a perfect life form, so the blood tribe would naturally be enlightened by his blood. In other words, the evolution of life forms has something to do with the heavenly Tao. This emperor, who had been stuck at the Tao integration pinnacle stage for a long time, swallowed as he looked down at the heavenly human tribe United Army. He was suddenly feeling a little thirsty. Aside from that, the powerful beings of the Void Spirit tribe and the creation realm, who were subordinates of the heavenly gods, were also feeling a little remorseful in their hearts. Why had they pledged allegiance to the heavenly human tribe and fought for the heavenly gods? It was all because they felt like the heavenly human tribe was far too invincible and the paramount heavenly gods were far too terrifying. As such, the only way out was to curry favor with the heavenly human tribe and hope that the paramount heavenly gods would spare them after destroying the human race. But now, their comrades were dying one after another, and their mighty figures were falling one after another. From a huge advantage that he had no solution to, he kept on losing, and now he was evenly matched. How was this a situation where he could easily win? This was clearly a situation where he could lose his life at any moment. Now, even the heavenly darkness god was on the heaven-crushing United Army's side. Sai, Hongdo, do you think it's too late for Grandpa to switch sides now? Yudo spread open his arms to defend himself against the oncoming attacks with a resigned expression. Hongdo wore a bitter expression. How are we supposed to switch sides? The battle has already progressed to this point. Will they believe us if we suddenly switch sides? How are we supposed to make them believe us? Based on the fact that you fought alongside Enlin and spent time in jail together? Yudo asked. Hongdo, the bright red stone man, turned his gaze to the direction of the huge god with mixed feelings and sighed with emotion. Enlin, I really didn't expect that you could grow to such an extent in such a short time. Previously, you said that you don't have the power to decide the direction of the battlefield, but now it seems you really have the strength to dominate the entire battle. Hongdo felt like he was a spectator who only knew how to cheer. No, it was still different from a spectator who only knew how to shout 666, because it could still be beaten to death. Sigh. I've narrowed my own path. Hondo sighed with emotion. Meanwhile, at the epicenter of the earthquake, an omnipotent god was staring at a white-robed man. Just the energy gathered from his aura alone was enough to crush a Tao integration stage super mighty figure. And Lin stared at the gigantic god in front of him, and his expression changed quite a bit. The opponent was very strong. When he unleashed his divine Tao of darkness, he had already sensed this absolute pressure. So this is the heavenly earth god's true Tao manifestation? And Lin gripped his evil-slaying sword tightly, and darkness materialized beneath his feet. The heavenly sea god had told him that the paramount heavenly gods would self-detonate once they were forced into a corner, but he didn't tell him that the enhancement effect would be this massive. Even though Lin had unleashed his divine Tao of darkness, he was still struck by an indescribable sense of asphyxiation in the face of the heavenly earth god's might. And Lin turned toward the heavenly sea god in the distance. His intention was quite clear. How long are you going to Astra's King watch this for? Prior to this battle, the heavenly sea god had told Lin that when the heavenly earth god was forced into a corner, he would stand up with Lin to repel the heavenly earth god. The heavenly sea god blinked as his mind raced. The heavenly earth god's true Tao manifestation had already been forced out, so his most important objective had been achieved. And Lin's combat prowess had suddenly skyrocketed, and he was now able to use the power of the heavenly darkness gods. He had most likely forced out the mystic technique to exchange his life for the power of the heavenly darkness gods. His second objective had also been achieved. And Lin couldn't die. He still had to help him force the other paramount heavenly gods into a corner as well. With this in mind, the heavenly sea god turned toward the heavenly yin-yang god with a benevolent expression. Yin-yang, it's time for us to attack. Attack! The heavenly yin-yang god was given a fright. The heavenly earth god has unleashed his true Tao manifestation. So shouldn't we be keeping our distance? Idiot! The heavenly sea god roared with rage. Do you know how perilous the heavenly earth god's current situation is? A paramount heavenly god will only unleash his true Tao manifestation when he's forced into a corner. At this critical juncture, we can't hold back any longer. The heavenly yin-yang god tapped the cracked divine halo above his head with a hint of fear in his eyes. Didn't you say that attacking recklessly would harm the heavenly earth god's dignity? Are you stupid? He's even unleashed his true Tao manifestation now. So why would he care about his dignity? The heavenly sea god's words enlightened the heavenly yin-yang god. All right, heavenly sea god, I'll attack with you. The heavenly yin-yang god's battle intent was ignited. Boom! Two powerful auras erupted forth. The heavenly sea god stepped onto a massive wave and charged toward Lin. A pair of black and white yin-yang wings spread open on the heavenly yin-yang god's back, and he wielded the yin divine saber in one hand and the extreme yang sword in the other as he charged toward Lin with boundless might. And Lin, today is the day you die. The heavenly yin-yang god roared as he slashed his sword and saber toward Lin at the same time. However, what he didn't realize was that the heavenly sea god wasn't as fast as he was, and he was left in the dust. Then, he saw a smile appear on Lin's face. A chill ran down his spine when he saw that smile. You really don't learn from your mistakes. A black sword projection suddenly appeared between heaven and earth. This was absolute darkness, and it tore through the heavenly yin-yang god's extreme yang sword and yin divine saber like lightning. The heavenly yin-yang god finally recalled just how terrifying the enemy he was facing was. Heavenly sea god, save me! The heavenly yin-yang god yelled in shock and horror. The heavenly sea god slashed a water blade toward Lin's black sword projection. Bam! The two powers collided, and Lin's black sword projection was forced to stop for a split second. However, the water blade was soon engulfed by the black sword projection. What? The heavenly sea god's expression shifted drastically, as if he didn't expect Enlin to be so powerful. At this moment, the black sword projection had already struck the heavenly Yin-Yang god's body, and it tore through the Yin divine saber and extreme Yang sword before slicing him in half. No! The heavenly Yin-Yang god's eyes widened with remorse. He shouldn't have provoked Enlin. Why would he provoke Enlin at a time like this? He would have to be insane to provoke Enlin. However, it was too late. The divine halo above his head cracked before shattering into countless specks of light, and his body was engulfed by boundless darkness. The heavenly Yin-Yang god had been insta-killed by Enlin. Chapter 2095. The heavenly sea god hurtled back in retreat to evade Enlin's sword projection with shock and rage etched on his face. How dare you, Enlin? You dare to kill the heavenly Yin-Yang god. Enlin slowly sheathed his sword with a cold expression. I'll kill anyone who dares to interfere in my battle. Have you two had enough fun? A voice that seemed to be standing at the pinnacle of the heavens erupted beside their ears. Enlin and the heavenly sea god both turned toward the gigantic divine being, and their expressions both shifted. The heavenly earth god had said, "You two could have seen something?" At this moment, the heavenly earth god's head was in the heavens, and his feet were on the ground. Golden flames burned in his eyes, making him appear as if he were a pair of blazing suns. His nine-colored Tao armor exuded the most powerful Tao intent, and both his aura and the power of the earth were at their peak. Most importantly, at some point in time, densely packed planets of various sizes had appeared behind him. These planets were following him like slaves. Countless rivers of silver stars revolved around his left arm, as well as the boundless star map in his right hand, all of which were exuding peculiar energy fluctuations that resonated with the planets behind him. A white light flashed through Enlin's eyes as he tried to assess the heavenly earth god's current power. However, right at this moment, the heavenly earth god had already extended a finger toward Enlin from afar. Rumble! A silvery white river formed from the cores of 99,999 planets erupted from the tip of the finger, lighting up heaven and earth as it crashed into the darkness barrier around Enlin's body. The darkness barrier was then forcibly torn apart before crashing into Enlin's body. Enlin was struck by an unimaginable force, as if he had really been struck by tens of thousands of planets. Countless crimson veins instantly appeared on his skin, and darkness seeped out from his heart in the blink of an eye to replenish the crimson veins. If it weren't for the fact that darkness had come to his rescue, his divine body would have been shattered in that instant. PFFF. Even though he had reacted in time, Enlin's internal organs were still impacted, and he threw up a mouthful of blood as his body was forced into the ground by the boundless silvery white river. One strike. Just one strike. The heavenly darkness god broke through Enlin's darkness defense and smashed him into the ground. The heavenly earth god looked down at the massive hole in the ground with a cold expression, as if he were the most powerful being in the world. Billions of stars are made of matter, and I am the ruler of matter. This is my Tao origin form, the ruler of the stars. The heavenly earth god spread open its arms, and countless stars shimmered incessantly behind it. Power flowed relentlessly into its body, and the accumulated power within its body continued to become more and more profound. It was also at this moment that a deep and pure darkness began to spread out from the hole. Enlin's robe had been torn to shreds, and he transformed into a series of afterimages as he pounced toward the heavenly earth god like a curtain of darkness. Ding! He stabbed his evil-slaying sword into the heavenly earth god's chest, upon which a crisp, melodious sound akin to the playing of a musical instrument erupted. Enlin's pupils contracted slightly. This sword strike had been imbued with the power of his darkness divine Tao, and it would be able to severely wound or even insta-kill a heavenly Yin-Yang god. However, it was unable to break through the heavenly earth god's armor. Thump! The darkness around his heart suddenly began to pulse. Enlin unleashed his darkness divine Tao again to converge all of his power of the divine Tao into a single point. The darkness emanating from the tip of the sword began to engulf the power of the Tao on the armor, and cracks began to appear on it. It's working, and Lin was ecstatic to see this. At this moment, an extremely vast burst of energy suddenly erupted in the air above, and Lin was greeted by the sight of an earthy yellow palm imbued with boundless star energy hurtling toward him at an extremely terrifying speed. The power encompassed by this palm made it impossible for him to escape. Great Nebula Palm. The heavenly earth god extended his left arm, upon which countless rivers of silver stars revolved around it, before crashing down with a vicious palm. Even the space within a radius of several hundred kilometers was flattened and twisted by this palm. It was like it was slapping a mosquito that wanted to suck its blood. It slapped its own chest with one hand. From Lin's perspective, it really did look like a nebula was hurtling toward him. The nebula covered a vast area, and its speed was insanely fast. There was no time for him to evade, and Lin pulled out his evil slaying sword before slashing it toward the great nebula palm, upon which darkness erupted forth. Bam! An earth-shattering palm fell. The nebula exploded. The darkness surging forth from Lin's sword was dispelled, and his body was immediately crushed by the palm, upon which he was flattened like a sandwich between the 9 sets of armor and the palm. Boom! The 9 sets of armor exploded. The heavenly earth god had smashed them into smithereens, and Lin was right at the center, so one could imagine just how terrifying the power he had to endure was. He felt as if his entire body had been crippled by that palm, and he had lost all sensation. Countless substances imbued with top-level essential power crashed into his body in a frenzy, trying to destroy everything about him. So what if it's darkness? As long as my Tao, intent, and power of the heavenly gods are powerful enough, I can still crush you. The heavenly earth god looked at the nearly crippled Lin, but his right hand continued to spread open the vast star atlas. Realm of stars, for extreme baleful chi, appear. 4 crimson specks of light appeared on the star atlas. Immediately afterward, 4 of the countless stars hovering behind the heavenly earth god tore through space at an extremely fast speed before hurtling toward Lin. A pure golden wave, over 1,000,000 feet tall, suddenly swept toward him from a distance. Earth, I'm here to help you. The heavenly sea god let loose an explosive roar as divine light erupted from the divine halo above his head. The paramount power of the heavenly gods was several times more powerful than the one he had unleashed against Lin. The heavenly earth god's expression darkened at the sight of the oncoming heavenly sea god. Don't cause trouble for me. His voice had only just fallen when the pure golden wave imbued with boundless power crashed down upon Lin's body. Of course, the heavenly earth god's gargantuan body was even more affected by the massive wave. Due to its size, it was countless times more fearsome than Lin's attack. Rumble, the golden wave was imbued with divine Tao battle intent that was capable of crushing all things as it crashed into the heavenly earth god's body, forcing the heavenly earth god to stumble back and retreat before being flipped over by the massive wave. The 4 red stars didn't even have a chance to reach Lin before they were disrupted by the golden wave. It was also at this moment that darkness suddenly tore through the golden wave and arrived before the heavenly earth god. Evil sword technique, eternal night. The inky black sword blade sliced through all obstacles. Darkness descended, and an extremely sharp blade engulfed everything in its path. The heavenly earth god had shattered his 9-colored Tao armor with a single palm, which essentially stripped him of his defenses. As such, Lin's attack just so happened to bypass the armor and strike the heavenly earth god's body. Whoosh! The dark divine Tao blade tore through his extremely sturdy divine body before slicing into his body, leaving behind a black wound that was spreading relentlessly. The heavenly earth god roared with rage. Ocean. Chapter 2096. I'm sorry, I was wrong. I didn't do it on purpose. The heavenly ocean god hurriedly tried to explain himself with a guilty expression on his face. Lin's sword strike had wounded the heavenly earth god, and he was just about to unleash another sword strike when one of the planets behind the heavenly Earth god suddenly flew toward him. It quickly expanded from over 100 feet in size to over 1,000 feet, over 100,000 feet, over 1,000,000 feet before crashing heavily toward Enlin with the power of extreme frost. Enlin raised his head and slashed his sword toward the oncoming planet, and he felt as if he had struck something extremely dense. Boundless power crashed violently into his already wounded body, and the boundless kinetic energy imbued within the planet threatened to crush everything in its path. He felt as if there really were a planet that had been compressed to the extreme before crashing toward him mercilessly. Enlin didn't even get a chance to slice through the planet before he was sent flying into the distance by the planet. He then crashed heavily into the ground, creating a gargantuan trench in the ground. The heavenly Earth god stood up again, and his body shuddered as a greenish-yellow power of earth erupted from his body, dispersing all of the golden liquid. He shot a cold glance at the heavenly sea god, only to find the heavenly sea god cowering into the distance with an apologetic smile on his face. The heavenly Earth god ignored him and pounced toward Enlin again. His body was massive, but his movements were extremely agile. He took a single step forward, and his body covered a distance of several hundred kilometers before appearing directly in front of Enlin, upon which he launched an almighty fist toward Enlin, who was being crushed by the planet. The fist crashed down with countless dazzling stars. Great Earth meteor fist. Boom, boom, boom. Countless stars crashed down, and the planet above Enlin instantly crumbled. An unimaginably ferocious storm then erupted with boundless destructive power. True planet baptism. The power of this fist was indescribable. The power of the earth was unleashed to the extreme, and the power of the stars crashed relentlessly toward Enlin. The entire earth tremored violently, and the ground within a radius of several thousand kilometers crumbled. Enlin unleashed his divine Tao of darkness to enshroud his entire body, and he trembled like a helpless leaf in the face of the ferocious attacks. He was completely powerless to defend himself. The heavenly sea god's eyelids twitched upon seeing this. Had Enlin been pummeled to death by the heavenly Earth god? This paramount heavenly god's ultimate form, true manifestation of Tao, was no joke. Under normal circumstances, Enlin would be able to come out on top against the heavenly Earth god. However, once the heavenly Earth god unleashed its true manifestation of Tao, Enlin was instantly the one being bashed without being able to retaliate. The heavenly sea god was just about to charge forward and wreak havoc. Suddenly, 4 red stars appeared around him, releasing a piercingly cold and deep killing intent, giving him a very dangerous feeling. Star region for extreme baleful chi? These should be the 4 stars with the densest killing intent in the universe. The heavenly Earth god had even brought out something like this, and he was using it against me. The heavenly sea god's expression shifted drastically. Brother Earth, have you misunderstood something? The heavenly Earth god wore a cold expression, and the flames burning in his eyes threatened to burn the heavenly sea god into ashes. Do you really think I'm an idiot? You set up a trap to kill the heavenly yin-yang god, and now you're trying to stop me from killing Enlin. Do you think I don't know what you're thinking? The heavenly sea god was a little dazed. Had he still been exposed in the end? The shroud-like darkness dissipated to reveal Enlin, who was riddled with wounds. Enlin felt as if all of his energy had been sapped from the great Earth meteor fist, and his entire body was in disarray. It was as if he had been completely crippled. He looked up at the heavenly Earth god and the heavenly sea god, and a hint of disappointment welled up in his heart. Sigh. Had his relationship with the heavenly sea god really been exposed? However, this was a good thing. Now that the 2 heavenly gods were fighting, he was in a much safer situation. The heavenly Earth god spoke in a cold voice. I don't know why you chose to betray me at a time like this, but are you sure that life and the heavens are right? You traitor. Do you know how much of a calamity you would bring to the heavenly Tao by allying with life and the heavens? Now, in order to kill me, you're even willing to protect Enlin's life. What a grand scheme. The heavenly sea god. And Lin, what? I haven't been exposed. And Lin was dumbstruck. From what the Heavenly Earth God had said, it seemed like the Heavenly Earth God had only guessed that the Heavenly Sea God had allied with life in the heavens. So he was using him. What a good move to throw the blame across the mountain. Of course, this was indeed the truth. However, the friendship between Enlin and the Heavenly Sea God would be safe. Sigh. A grief-stricken expression appeared on the Heavenly Sea God's face. Earth, how can you not believe me? I really am on your side. The Heavenly Earth God turned away from the Heavenly Sea God. If you dare to stop me from killing Enlin, I'll kill you right now. He charged toward Enlin again as he spoke. Enlin's expression shifted drastically, and he didn't even get a chance to heave a sigh of relief before he yelled, Oi, the Heavenly Sea God is a traitor. Kill him. Why the F*** CK are you hitting me? The Heavenly Sea God's eyelids twitched. The Heavenly Earth God's aura surged into the heavens as he continued to throw punches toward Enlin. You forced me to reveal my true Tao form, so of course I'm going to let you enjoy it first. Enlin almost cursed out loud upon hearing this. Why was he still so rational at a time like this? Shouldn't he be bashing whoever he saw? The sound of space exploding erupted. The Heavenly Earth God's gargantuan body instantly appeared before Enlin, and his left arm, which was intertwined with countless silver galaxies, extended again. He clenched his fist, and a vast amount of stardust converged on his fist, as if it were a boundless nebula. Great Nebula Fist. The Heavenly Earth God's fist once again struck Enlin with the feeling that there was nowhere for him to evade. Enlin discovered that ever since the Heavenly Earth God had unleashed his true Tao form, he was unable to evade any of his attacks. It was like the earth beneath the feet of countless living beings. No matter where they were, they would always be subjected to gravitational force. How could a single person possess the power to transcend beyond this boundless earth? Perhaps this was one of the special characteristics of the Heavenly Earth God's true Tao form. This attack could not be evaded. The Great Nebula Fist had almost crippled Enlin. Now, the Great Nebula Fist was even more terrifying, and it was most likely going to pulverize his entire body into dust. Enlin gritted his teeth and forcibly activated the power of the Darkness Divine Tao within his body again as he slashed his sword toward the Heavenly Earth God's Nebula Fist. Pure darkness transformed into the most offensive sword projection, which clashed with the massive silver Nebula Fist. Heaven and earth instantly fell, deathly silent. However, his darkness was soon broken by the Heavenly Earth God's Nebula Fist. There was nothing that could be done. From a fundamental standpoint, the two of them were actually on the same level of power. However, the Heavenly Earth God had unleashed an even more extreme power, thereby crushing Enlin in terms of quantity. The darkness didn't even get a chance to devour much of the power of the earth before it was blasted apart by the pure and terrifying power of the earth. The result was as one could imagine. After the devastating fist projection exploded, Enlin was pummeled into the ground, and all of his muscles and bones were shattered, creating an extremely wretched sight to behold. He had truly been forced into a corner by the Heavenly Earth God's true Tao form. Enlin stood up with great difficulty at the very center of the crater in the ground. His vision was a little blurry, and his eyes were completely red due to the injuries they had sustained. His enemy was in a very good condition, but he was completely drained of energy and severely wounded. What else was there? What other power could break out of this situation? Chapter 2097. Under these circumstances, Enlin couldn't even run away. The Heavenly Earth God was simply too powerful. He had to become more powerful in order to secure victory. Enlin still had one final trump card, which was to sacrifice his own life force in order to elevate his power explosively again. However, he had already made up his mind not to use that technique again. He had already lost 3/5 of his life force, and if he continued to use it, he really would die. Boom, boom, boom. The Heavenly Earth God made his way toward Enlin, and the earth tremored with each step he took, creating a series of gargantuan craters. He looked down at Lin with his starry eyes, as if he were a god looking down at an ant. Let's continue. Lin, your end is here. The heavenly earth god tossed the star map in his hand. Heavenly star attraction. Dazzling starlight began to erupt from the floating stars behind him. A terrifying gravitational force pulled Lin's body toward the heavenly earth god. This gravitational pull was so strong that even light could not escape its pull. At the same time, Lin's power had been completely sealed during this process, and he was unable to use any of his own power. The heavenly earth god was going to kill Lin. He couldn't give up. He couldn't give up on any opportunity. Lin calmed down at this moment. Time suddenly began to pass by very slowly, and his storage ring began to glow with a faint light. Heavenly God technique, heavenly jade wave, a boundlessly majestic voice suddenly sounded. Raging waves roared, and a boundless ocean surged. Green waves surged violently in the sky, and it looked as if the entire sky had been transformed into a rotating green ocean that was crashing down upon the earth. Extreme pressure imbued with the power of the ocean crashed down upon the heavenly earth god's body. Rumble. The heavenly earth god's body swayed from the force of the ocean, and he let loose an earth-shattering roar of rage. Heavenly sea god, you're courting death. Lin's body was finally freed for a short period of time. He immediately pulled out a huge disc from his storage ring. At the same time, the Hongmeng divine shuttle, puppet heart of 10,000 incarnations, red dancing divine sword, infernal dragon saber bone, necromancy divine scepter, extreme godly heavenly saber, chaos armor, black origin divine spear, and extreme star appeared. 9 life origin plate activate. 9 types of peak divine powers with different characteristics started to merge in a unique way, creating a brand new power that quickly overflowed from the Yuan board. It was like water and mist at the same time. Sometimes it was purple, sometimes it was golden, and sometimes it was a mixture of purple and gold. It came from nothingness and was born from the primordial chaos, as if it had transcended heaven and earth. And Lin knew that this was grand mist energy, one of the most original powers in the universe. He unleashed his full power from the get-go to activate the 9 life vital disc, and the purplish-golden vital energy transformed into a sharp blade that sliced through the 9-colored armor that had been completely repaired by the heavenly earth god. Sizzle, the sound of liquid being vaporized erupted. The purplish-golden saber blade quickly sliced into the heavenly earth god's armor, and the armor, which was imbued with the paramount Tao intent, twisted and melted before being slowly stripped away from this world. In the end, it was completely erased from this world. Not only was the purplish-golden blade able to pierce through the heavenly earth god's defenses, but it was also able to affect the armor around the gash. It was as if scorching flames had transformed into a blade that sliced into a tree trunk. Not only was it able to carve out a gash, but it was also able to incinerate all of the nearby trees. In the blink of an eye, a gash of over 100 feet in size had been sliced into the 9-colored Tao armor. The heavenly earth god was just about to lash out at the heavenly sea god when he was given a fright by the power of Lin's treasure. He had initially planned to attack the heavenly sea god, but he turned his attention to Lin again as the power of the 9 life vital disc struck him with a hint of danger. At this moment, Lin had already sliced open the heavenly earth god's body with his purplish-golden primordial saber. The blade materialized from primordial energy was extremely powerful, and there was no way that it would be able to withstand its power. However, its only flaw was that the area of effect was far too small. To the heavenly earth god, this small wound was not even enough to scratch an itch. The heavenly earth god couldn't help but burst into laughter at the sight of Lin slicing open a small piece of its skin with his purplish-golden primordial saber. Lin, so that's all you've got. He was just about to finish off this ant with a single punch when he saw Lin devour the piece of flesh that had been sliced open in a disgusting manner. The heavenly earth god was originally still maintaining his high and mighty expression, but he was completely dumbstruck upon seeing this. Was this Lin a freak? He was eating its flesh. That's right. And Lin had taken every opportunity to unleash his primordial energy attack on the heavenly earth god in order to dig out a piece of its flesh and eat it. Why? It was because of the system mission. This was a mission that he had deemed to be impossible to complete a long time ago, but he had finally taken this opportunity to complete it. This was also one of his hidden trump cards. System Cultivation Realm Mission. Tao Integration Stage. Condition fulfilled. Eat a piece of the paramount heavenly god's flesh. And Lin knew that the 9-life vital disc wouldn't be able to kill the heavenly earth god, but he could think of a way to use the 9-life vital disc to complete the system mission. Gulp. And Lin swallowed the heavenly earth god's flesh before hurtling back in retreat. This piece of flesh didn't taste like meat. Instead, it felt like a rock, and after swallowing it, he felt as if he had swallowed an entire continent. The terrifying sense of fullness was threatening to make his stomach explode in the next second. Thankfully, his power of the divine Tao of darkness was in his heart, which was able to repress and digest this power. The heavenly earth god was currently using his true form of Tao, which was the most fundamental form of his body. In other words, its current physical body was actually its most fundamental Tao. By swallowing the heavenly earth god's flesh, and Lin had actually swallowed the heavenly earth god's most fundamental Tao. The heavenly earth god's paramount heavenly god true intent also exploded within Lin's body in an unbridled manner, destroying everything within his body. And Lin was severely wounded again, and he threw up a mouthful of blood. The heavenly earth god was ecstatic upon seeing Lin throw up blood. Have you been beaten senseless by me? Each and every piece of my flesh is imbued with enough energy to destroy an entire planet. Yet you're swallowing it like this? Are you trying to commit suicide? And Lin knew that doing this would be the same as swallowing a nuclear bomb. However, he had no other choice. He could only fight. Finally, just as his stomach was about to explode, the divine Tao of darkness within his body finally began to stir. It was frantically devouring the paramount heavenly earth god's power, upon which its body also began to change, as if it were undergoing some kind of baptism. Not only had it received a terrifying increase in quantity, but it had also gained a hint of eternity. A voice suddenly sounded in his mind. Ding dong. Congratulations, host, on successfully completing the mission. You will now break through to the Tao integration stage. Chapter 2098. The power of the earth within Lin's body was still churning violently. At this moment, the system's voice sounded, and his entire body shuddered. Thump! A heartbeat sounded. It came from within his body. It then spread throughout the entire heaven and earth. It was as if the entire heaven and earth had tremored in response. The terrifying power of the earth within Lin's body was instantly engulfed by the darkness, as if it had never existed in the first place. At this moment, the heavenly earth god's fist was already crashing down upon him like a massive divine mountain. However, Lin stood rooted to the spot, as if he had forgotten to dodge. Great nebula fist. The heavenly earth god's fist fell viciously, and the countless silver nebulas enshrouding his fist instantly exploded before engulfing Lin's body. The heavenly earth god didn't even have a chance to celebrate before a sense of horror welled up in his heart. No, I didn't hit him. The flames in the heavenly earth god's eyes became even brighter, and he was able to see through the nebula to see what was happening within. However, he discovered that Lin was like an invisible black shadow, and the fist and energy both passed through his body without striking him at all. In the blink of an eye, Lin's body disappeared again. In the next instant, he appeared in the air over 500 kilometers away, with a single hand plunged into the heavens. Something's not right. The heavenly earth god's expression became extremely grave. How can Lin's aura be? The heavenly sea god's eyes also widened, and Lin's aura had already disappeared. To put it more accurately, he no longer existed in the form of a life form. Each and every one of his breaths was like the breath of the heavens, and it could affect the rhythm of all things on this continent. An extremely pure darkness began to appear from the spot wherein Lin had plunged into the heavens. The darkness was spreading at an incredible speed, and the entire battlefield had been plunged into darkness in the blink of an eye before continuing to expand outward. It was like a black hole that could engulf everything between heaven and earth. Even the concept of heaven and earth had become blurry, and everything had become pure darkness for all eternity. What's going on? Why is there no light in the sky? All of the living beings in Yutong City let loose cries of surprise. Isn't this too much of a scam? Some experts widened their eyes, and their bodies couldn't help but shiver. The darkness in the sky was too pure. Apart from darkness, nothing else could exist. Just by looking at it, it was as if the entire existence would be absorbed by the darkness. Don't be afraid. This is the darkness released by sect leader and Lin. Yes, this is used to kill enemies. Let's continue fighting. The soldiers of the heaven-crushing army yelled. However, their bodies were trembling uncontrollably, betraying their current state. This was an instinctive fear, not an emotional fear. It was as if a great terror was about to descend from the sky, and they could only watch. The darkness covered millions of li, but this was far from the end. It was still expanding endlessly, as if there was no end to it. It would only end when everything returned to nothingness. A peculiar melody began to reverberate throughout the entire Tai Chu continent. It was extremely pleasant to listen to, capable of intoxicating every living being within its melody. At the same time, the emotions of eternal darkness that it released were also sensed by all living beings. This emotion was imperceptibly promoting the beauty of darkness. Everything returned to nothingness, but everything remained eternal. Countless living beings were struck by the same thought in that instant. It seemed like being immersed in darkness wasn't a bad thing after all. At the summit of the divine tree in the white nectar sea, an exquisitely beautiful woman with long, dark green hair suddenly stood up, and an expression of shock appeared on her face as she looked up at the darkness in the sky. This is the true voice of the heavenly Tao, and it's the true voice of the heavenly Tao that encompasses the entire continent. Could it be that the heavenly Tao of darkness is about to become complete? Sky, are you there? What's going on? A massive head constructed from clouds and mist appeared in the sky with a blank expression. I don't know. Everything in the heavenly Tao is serving in Lin. Even in Lin has taken control of the sky. At this moment, darkness is the ruler, the heavenly life goddess, within the cabin of life. A satisfied smile appeared on Yua's face. My Tao power is about to transform. Hurry up and activate the fourth stage of mending the heavens, Tao power replenishment. Yes, Your Majesty. Little Hong Ling wore a solemn expression as he manipulated a massive sand table. The pillar of white light rising into the sky began to transform as he manipulated the sand table. At the same time, the pillar of white light rising into the sky above the Tai Chu continent's purple star state was also transforming. Purple star state, land of eternal light. Darkness had already spread to this point, obscuring the entire sky. Our third heavenly disciple has become even more powerful. Cyril was followed by countless projections of terrifying fiend celestial beings, and he chortled with glee. Why are you always bullying me, Light? Why don't you fight the darkness if you dare? Aren't you two sworn enemies? Before Cyril stood an extremely holy and radiant goddess, as if she were the embodiment of all hope in this world. There was a hint of confusion on her dark face. When darkness appears, it should return to the heavens. Why do I feel so uneasy? It's as if this darkness is separated from the heavens. She stopped her battle with Cyril and looked up into the boundless darkness. Within the heaven-crushing glazed palace, Chen stood silently at the core of the spell formation. His spotless realm expanded to block all of the attacks from the four heavenly gods. He didn't even bother to look at their attacks as he stared at the darkness in the sky with his clear eyes. Welcome to the final stage. The darkness spread like a black cloth, enshrouding the entire Tai-Chu continent, allowing all living beings to experience what true darkness was. Within Chun-Shi City, both the cultivators and the heavenly human tribe were shocked by the sudden appearance of darkness. They didn't understand what was happening, and some of them even thought that the end of the world had arrived. Chang Yi, who was in the process of pursuing the heavenly gods, saw that her moon had been enshrouded in darkness, and her connection to the moon had been severed, and a faint smile appeared on her face. Oof, what a violent bastard. Without the moon to decorate the night, it'll be very dull. Why can't he understand? Within the territory of the 10,000 spirits immortal sect in the kingdom of the 9 states, the little red flower raised its head with a thoughtful expression. Master, on the central battlefield, the invincible heavenly earth god had completely given up on attacking Enlin at the center of the darkness. It had a strong feeling that if it were to attack Enlin now, it would suffer an extremely fearsome backlash, and it might even perish. It couldn't disrupt the heavenly Tao. The heavenly Tao was conferring godhood upon Enlin. Chapter 2099. Enlin was in a very peculiar state. He opened his eyes to discover that there were no whites left in his eyes. Instead, they had all become black, and his field of vision was pitch black, as if he couldn't see anything at all. However, he felt like he could sense everything in this world. It was as if he could sense everything between heaven and earth if he wanted to understand it. He could see Su Xiaolan looking at him with a concerned expression. He could see his friends and comrades fighting a bloody battle in the Wind Plain state. He could see the heavenly light goddess using photons to analyze his state of darkness. What kind of feeling is this? What a strange feeling. He didn't know how to describe it. If he had to describe it, there was one word that was more appropriate. That was, he was omnipotent. However, there was a prerequisite. That was, he had to abandon his past as a human. He had to sever all of his beast pets and servants, as well as all of his memories with all of his acquaintances. He had to become one with heaven and earth and become the heavenly Tao. Omniscience, omnipotence. What a tempting power. And Lin murmured to himself in a calm and ethereal voice. Heaven and earth changed color at his words, and the entire dark sky trembled in response. He could experience that feeling now. He could control everything and transcend the natural order of life. This was an extremely wonderful feeling, and every single cell in his body was jumping with joy. All of them yearned to forever remain in that state of the heavenly Tao. This was a type of ultimate evolution, an absolute sublimation, and Lin's choice to become the heavenly Tao seemed to be the most correct one. The most correct choice? Becoming the heavenly Tao is indeed wonderful. Heaven and earth suddenly fell silent. Ordinary mighty figures at the return to void pinnacle stage, transcending their tribulations to the Tao integration stage, were all earth-shattering events. However, it was exceptionally quiet when it came to Enlin. Heaven and earth had fallen silent, and everything was waiting for Enlin to make a decision. This decision seemed to be the key to whether or not Enlin's tribulation transcendence would succeed. But Enlin smiled, and his smile was imbued with a prideful sense of defiance. Why should I have to abandon everything in order to become the heavenly Tao? Only children make choices. I'm already an adult. I want everything. Enlin's voice fell, and heaven and earth fell into a momentary silence. This answer caused the heavenly Tao to pause for a moment. The heavenly earth god and the heavenly sea god's eyes widened in disbelief as they stared at the white-robed man. This Enlin, was he crazy? Where did his confidence come from? They really dared to choose. Su Xiaolan seemed to have sensed something. She looked at the darkness in the distance and revealed a beautiful smile. Rumble. For the first time, a thunderous sound came from the dark and tranquil sky. It was as if the wrath of the heavens was about to descend upon the frail man. And Lin spread his arms wide and roared at the sky. Come on, no matter what tribulation it is, I can withstand it. The sky continued to rumble, and the pressure grew stronger and stronger. It was obvious that it was furious. The heavenly Tao wanted to become a god, but Enlin actually rejected it. How could it not be furious? The darkness suddenly split open, and a dark divine seal appeared from the crack. Like a bolt of heavenly lightning, it crashed down and exploded on Lin's body. Divine punishment has descended. The heavenly sea god let loose a cry of surprise. The heavenly earth god's eyes lit up. If he were to piss off the heavens like this, he would definitely suffer a backlash, even if this was the heavenly darkness god. It would be best if Lin perished from this backlash. That would save him a lot of trouble. As the energy exploded, Lin's blood-curdling cries also erupted. His cries were filled with pain and agony, and the heavenly earth god felt as if he had heard the voice of a celestial being. However, as he listened, he realized that something was off. Why did this sound feel a little good? The heavenly earth god turned toward Lin again, upon which an inky black divine seal appeared behind him, exuding an extremely terrifying power. How could this be? He absorbed the divine seal? Right at this moment, another earth-shattering boom erupted, and another divine seal tore through the darkness like a bolt of heavenly lightning before crashing viciously into Lin's fist. Lin's pained but exhilarated voice sounded again. Immediately afterward, a peculiar divine seal constructed from black lines appeared on his fist, upon which his aura became even more powerful. Boom. The divine seal continued to descend, smashing into his chest, and then remaining on his body, causing his strength to increase by a few more notches. The heavenly earth god was completely dumbstruck. He felt like things weren't progressing the way he had imagined them to. Wasn't he supposed to infuriate the heavenly Tao and unleash divine punishment? This divine seal didn't look like it was punishing an enemy. This was clearly funding his enemy and helping him become more powerful. Perhaps it was because it was also a paramount heavenly god that had some connection to the heavenly Tao, but the heavenly earth god suddenly understood what the heavenly Tao was really thinking. Lin was demanding an exorbitant price. He wanted both his status as a human and the power of the heavenly Tao. The heavenly Tao was going to give him a taste of what it felt like to have both of them. The heavenly earth god was dealt a second blow. His entire body was like a lemon. Why? Why does the heavenly Tao favor darkness so much? One dares to demand, and the other dares to give. What's wrong with the heavenly Tao? The heavenly earth god was a little dazed. The heavenly sea god was even more astonished, and he almost fell into a state of deep self-doubt. What was going on? Hadn't Lin obtained the power of darkness by sacrificing his life? Why was he becoming more powerful now? And it looked like he was making a breakthrough. Could it be that the power of darkness he had just used was just his normal power? Had the heavenly sea god been scared by his own speculation? How could Lin be so powerful? This was clearly an incomplete heavenly god of darkness. And now, he was even more powerful. Who could stop him now? The heavenly sea god was panicking, but he couldn't do anything, so he could only transmit his voice to Lin. Go, brother Lin. Don't worry about your safety. I'll protect you even if I have to give up my life. Lin ignored the heavenly sea god's words. He was trying his best to absorb the power of each and every divine seal. He could feel that his divine Tao of darkness was being perfected and reaching a new peak. These divine seals were all blessings bestowed upon him by the heavenly Tao. For normal mighty figures at the return to Void Pinnacle stage, they would be considered to have successfully progressed to the Tao integration stage after receiving the approval of the great Tao of heaven and earth. However, Lin didn't need the approval of the heavenly Tao at all. He was the heavens. He had to walk his own path as long as he was acknowledged by the heavens. Not only did Lin not suffer a calamity like this, which should have been punished by the heavens, he even received one powerful divine seal after another. That's right. The heavens were bestowing upon Lin the title of a god, and these divine seals were the cornerstones of his ascension. 1 hour later, Lin had fused countless divine seals of darkness together to form a chaotic vortex that revolved endlessly behind him. He opened his eyes, and his pupils returned to their original black and white state. His lips parted slightly. From this day forth, I am darkness. I, Enlin, am the paramount heavenly god." His voice reverberated throughout the entire continent and into the ears of countless living beings. "It's too dark." Enlin waved a hand toward the sky, and the curtain of darkness that struck fear into the hearts of countless living beings within a radius of hundreds of millions of kilometers instantly disappeared. At that moment, Enlin had successfully progressed to the Tao integration stage. Chapter 2100. Billions of living beings were astonished upon hearing Enlin's words. Even the heaven-crushing sect United Army, who had been mentally prepared for this, were extremely astonished. Sect leader Enlin admitted it himself. This must be the official announcement of his identity. Sect leader Enlin's style of broadcasting to the entire world really does suit him. God and his bad *SS. God and is invincible. The heaven-crushing sect United Army revered Enlin very much, and they were quite elated to hear this news. The tens of millions of living beings in the West Sea Alliance were extremely astonished. What? Our backer, Enlin, is the heavenly darkness god? It must be fake. He lied to us that he was the heavenly lightning god, and now he's saying he's the heavenly darkness god? Does he think we're that gullible? The darkness of heaven and earth belongs to him. It can't be fake this time. What do we do? I'm starting to panic. That's the heavenly darkness god. Just the name alone sounds evil. Why do we choose to follow him? The heavenly light god sounds very righteous. Why don't you go follow her? Let's see if she kills you first. A beautiful mermaid with fair and supple skin lay on a colorful bubble and looked up into the sky with reverence and anticipation on her face. As expected, Big Boss is the heavenly darkness goddess. Now that I'm the heavenly water goddess and Big Boss is the heavenly darkness goddess, it feels even better. At the thought of this, the mermaid princess blushed, and she covered her burning cheeks with her fair hands. On the eastern front of the Kingdom of the 9 States United Army, our celestial court's war god is the heavenly darkness god. Holy F***CK. A cultivator can become the heavens? Nonsense. He's the heavens to begin with. He's just regaining his identity now. No wonder Enlin can even control heavenly tribulations. So it's his own divine lightning. Looks like Enlin's battle is quite intense. He's even forced to reveal his own identity. I suspect that he's become a lot more powerful. Haha. This is a blessing for the celestial court and the entire human race. Our enemies have paramount heavenly gods, but so do we. This emperor is very happy right now. After a brief moment of shock, everyone fell into ecstasy. Most of them trusted Enlin very much. They knew that even if Enlin was the heavenly darkness goddess, he wouldn't betray them. After all, Enlin had done many things for the human race in the past, and they remembered all of it. This was an absolute sense of identity and belonging. How could this be? Why would the paramount heavenly god side with the humans? No, this has to be fake. The heavenly karma god yelled with rage and confusion on his face. Empyrean god Black Mist, who was in the midst of fleeing, stuck his head out. His eyes shone brightly on his delicate face. At this moment, in the 10,000 spirits immortal sect, all of the 4-9 immortal sect members were already in high spirits. Holy shit, Big Brother and is the heavenly darkness goddess. So I'm a number 1 steed of the paramount heavenly gods. How awesome, woof. Dabai wagged his snowy white tail with excitement. Master has the strength to uproot mountains, and his might is unparalleled. He has crushed the heavens and destroyed the heavens. You can't even count the number of heavenly gods that have fallen by his hands. Who would have thought that he would be a heavenly god himself? Shui Zhantian flapped his snowy white wings and sighed with emotion. What do I do now? I, Shui Zhantian, swear that I will destroy all of the heavens in the 9 heavens, but Master is also the heavens. What a four-word idiom, four-word idiom, four-word idiom. Su Qinyan blinked her enchanting blue eyes. Big Sister Chong, he has become a moon, and classmate Enlin has become the heavens. That's really impressive. From now on, will there be people protecting me wherever I go? Enlin, Bai Ling pursed her lips and lowered her gaze. So that's how it is. No wonder I have this feeling toward him. he's darkness, within the central region of the Tai Chu continent. Enlin stood silently in the sky, dispelling the darkness over the entire continent with a wave of his hand. The heavenly earth god and the heavenly sea god were both astonished by the sight of this. The phenomena between heaven and earth completely disappeared. The tribulation transcendence was over. Enlin's aura became even more profound and ethereal. The heavenly sea god felt like he could see through Enlin even more. Did Enlin make another breakthrough? He successfully progressed to the Tao integration stage. The heavenly sea god didn't even know what to say. Why was he so flustered in the face of a Tao integration stage super mighty figure? He could kill any Tao integration stage super mighty figure with a casual slap. This was definitely a fake Tao integration stage super mighty figure. Upon closer inspection, Enlin didn't actually look much different from before. The only difference was that his long black hair was a little more elegant, and there was a divine seal revolving behind him like a chaotic black vortex. Aside from that, there didn't seem to be any other changes. Heavenly Darkness God, it's still not too late if you choose to stand with us. The Heavenly Earth God roared with rage at Enlin in the distance. He had discovered that the Heavenly Tao had concluded its business here, and he could now attack Enlin. Enlin suddenly chuckled at the sight of the extremely mighty being before him. Are you scared? The Heavenly Earth God faltered slightly upon hearing this before flared up with rage. You think I'm scared of you? We're both paramount heavenly gods, so why would I be scared of you? I'm still in my true form, and if it weren't for the Heavenly Tao... He didn't even get a chance to finish his sentence before Enlin suddenly appeared before the Heavenly Earth God, and he clenched his fist before launching an almighty fist toward his chest. Darkness exploded forth from his fist at this moment. The darkness divine Tao he unleashed this time was even purer than the one he had unleashed in the past. Furthermore, it was imbued with a sense of perfection and eternity, and it was extremely vast and boundless. Boom! The Heavenly Earth God's 9-colored Tao armor was shattered by a single punch. The huge fist formed by the power of darkness continued forward, smashing into the other party's chest. Then, it blasted open a huge hole tens of thousands of meters wide. The Heavenly Earth God was wounded again. This time, he let loose an involuntary wail of pain, and his body stumbled back in retreat. It was quite clear that his essence had been wounded, and Lin's full-force attack had only been able to puncture the Heavenly Earth God's armor, which wasn't even enough to tickle him. However, this time, Lin's punch was able to shatter both his armor and his body. This power was simply out of this world. Lin's power of darkness has become complete. The Heavenly Sea God's mind went completely blank upon seeing this, and only after a few seconds did he murmur to himself. He could sense that Lin's power of darkness was incomplete, which was why he was confident that he could control Lin. But now, Lin's power of darkness was flawless no matter how he looked at it, and it was exuding an aura of eternity. This was definitely the power of darkness in its most perfect form. As such, even if the Heavenly Earth God was in his most powerful state, it was still hard to say who would emerge victorious. Chapter 2101. Heavenly Earth God, do you still not understand the situation you're in? Lin looked at the massive god before him with a calm smile. In my eyes, you're no longer powerful. After saying that, the chaotic dark vortex behind him quickly gushed out darkness, forming a dark feather robe that seemed to be able to intimidate the minds of living beings. The Heavenly Earth God's body faltered, and boundless power of the earth erupted forth, making heaven and earth tremor violently. Lin, don't think that you're invincible now. The fact that you can wound me only means that you have the right to fight me. He waved a hand through the air, and the star Atlas rose into the sky before completely fusing together. All of the boundless stars in the sky resonated with the Heavenly Earth God in that instant, upon which dazzling starlight erupted before transforming into boundless power of stars that fell from the sky toward Lin. Boom! An unimaginable sealing power crashed down upon Lin's body. This was the power of the entire starry sky. I am the ruler of all the stars in this universe. Great starry sky suppression. The heavenly earth god unleashed a crushing force upon Enlin, and boundless power of stars crashed down upon Enlin's body like a torrential downpour of stars, shattering the space around him and causing the earth to wither away. An attack of this caliber could instantly insta-kill a Tao integration stage super mighty figure. The darkness around Enlin's body seeped out from his divine seal at the instant the heavenly earth god attacked, enveloping his entire body. It was impossible to see how thick the darkness was, but it was able to completely engulf and erase all of the outside power. Enlin looked up at the dazzling starlight falling from the sky, and it was an extremely spectacular sight, as if all of the stars in the universe were targeting him in order to suppress him. If he were a normal Tao integration stage, super mighty figure, he would have pissed his pants a long time ago. However, his expression remained calm and gentle, as if he were enjoying the scenery. If that's all you've got, then I'm going to have to keep bullying you. Enlin smiled. The heavenly earth god's eyes widened. Moon come. The stars, moon, and stars were all material objects that were under its jurisdiction. It was going to use all of its power to kill Enlin. Rumble, a brilliant white light, erupted from the full moon. Right at this moment, in the eastern region of the Tai Chu continent that was extremely far away from the battlefield, Chang'e raised her beautiful face and looked at the bright moon in the sky. You want to borrow my power? No way. She swept a sleeve through the air to sever her connection with the heavenly earth god. Where Enlin was, the full moon that had just bloomed with light suddenly withered. What? The heavenly earth god's eyes widened. Enlin seemed to understand something and laughed. The moon goddess doesn't seem to care about you. Are you worthy of the moon? The heavenly earth god. The heavenly earth god was truly enraged. He had always been a high and mighty being, and when had he ever been humiliated like this? Flames of rage erupted from his eyes, as if he were going to incinerate everything in this world. Immortal young eyes, superstar explosion. Boom! A star suddenly exploded in front of Enlin. A light that was countless times more dazzling than the sun bloomed. Accompanying this was an explosion of energy that was countless times more terrifying than that of the sun. This was a temperature that could twist and melt space and time, as well as countless different types of energy that could annihilate everything around it. It was as if the entire heaven and earth were going to be torn apart and reduced to ashes. Enlin's perfect darkness defense began to crack for the first time in the face of this attack. His chest was instantly charred black, and his brows furrowed deeply upon seeing this. It was also at this moment that the heavenly earth god's fist descended upon Enlin before the energy from the superstar explosion had even dissipated, giving him no chance to catch his breath. Enlin was no pushover, and he stomped a foot into the air. Countless black spikes suddenly erupted from the ground like swords and spears before puncturing the heavenly earth god's armor and body. If a normal heavenly god were to be attacked by darkness of this magnitude, the darkness would be able to engulf them into nothingness. However, the heavenly earth god was different. The paramount heavenly gods of earth could combat the power of darkness. The heavenly earth god let loose a muffled groan, and his fist continued to fall. Boom! The fist projection exploded. The already cracked darkness defense was smashed apart by the terrifying force. Enlin flew through the air as if he had been crushed by a small continent. The boundless power of the earth crashed into his body in a frenzy, threatening to destroy everything in its path. Ha ha ha! That's more like a battle. A black sword intent suddenly connected heaven and earth, slicing the massive fist in half. Enlin strode through the darkness toward the heavenly earth god with his evil-slaying sword in hand. Dragon Origin Star. The heavenly earth god waved a hand through the air, and a star behind him suddenly crashed toward Enlin. The star was entirely azure in color, and it was exuding an eternal aura. Enlin's expression shifted slightly. He could sense an aura that was identical to that of the main star in the Azure Dragon's domain. Could it be that this was the same type of star? The eternal aura imbued within the star, as well as the essential true intent of the azure dragon, had also been released from the star. Could it be that the power of a planet was also the same? Just as these thoughts were running through Enlin's mind, the dragon origin star was already crashing down upon him. At that moment, Enlin felt as if he could see a massive azure dragon extending its razor-sharp claws toward him. Enlin slashed his sword toward the oncoming star, and the extremely dense energy imbued within the star exploded forth, making his black sword tremor and almost give way to his divine Tao of darkness. Break through, Enlin slashed his evil-slaying sword down viciously, and the star before him was finally sliced in half. He could even hear the anguished wail of the azure dragon as the star fell. However, before he even had a chance to heave a sigh of relief, scorching essential flames suddenly rose up from the ground below, as if a vermilion star had risen into the sky. Dark water filled the sky above his head, and a blue star fell from the sky. Killing intent soared into the heavens from behind him as the golden star crashed toward him with the essential power of slaughter. Red sparrow, black tortoise, war tiger. The heavenly earth god let loose an explosive roar, and 3 stars that were as fearsome as the dragon origin star converged upon Enlin from 3 sides. Dark realm black star. Enlin turned around, and his evil-slaying sword drew a circle around his body, upon which darkness proliferated in a frenzy to form a constantly expanding dark star. From a distance, it looked as if 3 immensely powerful stars were crashing toward the black star in the center, creating an unimaginably spectacular spectacle. Boom, boom, boom. 3 earth-shattering booms erupted. Shockwaves wreaked havoc upon everything. Flames, killing intent, and dark water filled the entire area within a radius of tens of thousands of kilometers, crushing everything in a frenzy. This was the scene of a collision between 2 of the most powerful planets in the universe, and it was enough to devastate the entire battlefield. The black star tremored violently, and it was almost destroyed by the 3 stars, but it managed to hold on. After stabilizing itself, it continued to expand outward in an attempt to engulf the 3 stars. Right at this moment, the 4 stars imbued with crimson energy instantly shrank to countless times their original size before connecting into a straight line. They were like lethal arrows imbued with the extreme power of all matter in the universe as they pierced directly into the darkness. Realm of Stars Baleful 4. This was the killing technique that the heavenly earth god had prepared to keep the heavenly sea god in check. Now, he was using it against Enlin with his full power. The crimson arrow was peerlessly sharp, and it tore through the black planet violently before stabbing into Enlin's chest, which was at the center of the planet. Then, the crimson arrow pierced through everything and even the planet's core, forming a lethal crimson line. Everything had happened far too quickly. There had been almost no time lag between the realm of stars baleful for being unleashed and piercing through the core of the planet. An unimaginably excruciating pain erupted from Enlin's chest, and the most extreme killing intent radiated from his wound, destroying his bodily functions in a frenzy. This was a baleful aura that could annihilate an entire planet, and it was unimaginably terrifying. Chaotic Dead Star. The heavenly earth god made a peculiar divine seal, and a massive rift appeared at the pinnacle of the heavens. The aura of chaos and death descended, instantly filling the entire sky with a suffocating aura. There's still a technique? Enlin was truly astonished. Did the heavenly earth god not even have time to catch his breath after unleashing one technique after another? There were still a dozen or so black spikes sticking out of his body, so why wasn't he pulling them out? Enlin naturally couldn't afford to let his guard down. He unleashed his divine Tao of darkness to violently slice off the red arrow, and he had no time to repair his wound before charging toward the heavenly earth god. At this moment, the other 3 stars were already on the brink of collapse. Enlin had already charged out from the dark star, and he tossed a black particle toward the heavenly earth god. Heaven-crushing technique, dark Tao seed. The dark particle unleashed an energy that struck fear into the hearts of all things between heaven and earth, as if it were going to bring an end to the heavenly Tao. It started from the tiniest point, erupted with the most powerful force, and engulfed everything before returning to the tiniest point. Just like how the creation of the Tai Chu continent began from nothingness, everything would return to nothingness after its destruction. Even the heavenly Tao would return to nothingness. This was the true essence of the dark Tao seed. This was a top-tier technique of the heaven-crushing sect, and it was also a pinnacle Tao technique of darkness. And Lin was able to unleash this technique to its maximal extent by unleashing the complete divine Tao of darkness. There was no one more suitable to unleash this technique than him. With his understanding of darkness, he was confident that even Cyril and Chun Chin's dark Tao seed wouldn't be able to match up to his power. The dark Tao seed shot toward the heavenly earth god like a shooting star. Compared to the heavenly earth god's gargantuan body, this dark Tao seed was even smaller than a single cell. However, the heavenly earth god was so shocked that he immediately unleashed the silvery white galaxy on his left arm. Stop it! Countless silvery white stars crashed toward the dark Tao seed in a frenzy. At this moment, a dead star materialized from the corpses, flesh, and bones of countless living beings fell from the sky before crashing down toward Enlin with absolute death intent. Enlin had no time to defend himself as he focused all of his attention on controlling the dark Tao seed. The Taoist child of darkness rapidly increased in size during the warp. All the stars in its path became nothing, and not a single one was spared. Tao seed explode, crush him. Enlin and the heavenly earth god roared in unison. Boom! The black ball exploded, engulfing everything in its path. Even the heavenly earth god's body, which was imbued with the paramount power of the heavenly gods, was instantly engulfed. Boom! The dead star crashed down upon Enlin's head and smashed him into the ground. Chapter 2102. The chaotic dead stars were the stars with the most intense intent of death in the entire universe. Just the true intent of death emanating from them was enough to wipe out all life on the surrounding planets. It was death, but it was also eternal. It was like a bottomless pit that relentlessly devoured the life force of the surrounding stars and stripped them of everything. Only chaos could exist near it. Hence, the chaotic dead star was a combination of chaos and death. It was a freak of nature, and it was such a terrifying existence that it crashed mercilessly into Enlin's head. The power of chaos and the extremely rich essence of death crashed down upon Enlin in a frenzy. Imagine what it would feel like to be squashed under a planet condensed from billions of corpses and white bones. All he could see was twisted flesh and blood, as well as eerie white bones. Enlin could even see the anguished wails of billions of living beings, as well as countless chaotic evil ghosts that were trying to drag him down into the abyss of death with them. Enlin's power was mainly focused on the Dark Taoist, so his defensive capabilities against the chaotic dead star were extremely low. The crushing force of the chaotic dead star instantly made Enlin almost throw up blood. One terrifying chaotic evil ghost after another descended from the chaotic dead star before pouncing toward him. Some of them really did break through his defenses of darkness and left a few glaring claw marks on his body. Enlin was in a very sorry state, but Enlin felt like the heavenly earth god was in an even worse state. Most of the heavenly earth god's body, from his thighs to his chest, had been completely obliterated by the dark Taoist. Not even his organs were left, and all that was left were his scattered limbs, which were completely unable to support his body and collapsed to the ground. This was an extremely gruesome sight to behold. Enlin could even sense that the power of the chaotic dead star was beginning to loosen significantly. He was not going to pass up on an opportunity like this, and he unleashed his royal divine monarch technique, slicing the chaotic dead star in half. The darkness at the place where the Death Star was cut kept spreading. Amidst the screams of countless chaos monsters, the darkness devoured the entire star. Only falling into eternal darkness and nothingness is true death. Only then is it worthy of the name Death Star. And Lin looked at the empty sky and smiled. He turned toward the heavenly earth god. After the body that had been destroyed by the dark Taoist explosion crashed to the ground, a steady stream of the power of the earth poured into its body, covering the entire continent, which meant that the entire Tai Chu continent was repairing the heavenly earth god's body. Just how terrifying was the power of the earth involved? Only a few seconds later, it transformed back into a gargantuan divine spirit that looked down upon Enlin. TSK. Not bad at all. Enlin's mouth twitched slightly. His invincible spirit had been successfully dealt a blow. He had thought that it would be a piece of cake for him to crush the heavenly earth god after progressing to the Tao integration stage, but it looked like that was not the case. The heavenly earth god was far more powerful than he had imagined. The heavenly earth god didn't say anything upon hearing Enlin's words, but from its serious expression, it was quite clear that it was already treating Enlin as a true opponent. Star patterns flashed, and peculiar energy fluctuations surged through the starry sky. Their ruler was beginning to draw upon its boundless power. The sea of stars and rain of starlight descended once again. One of the most dangerous and terrifying planets in the universe appeared after another. They all hurtled toward Enlin, but Enlin was no pushover either. He unleashed one dark spell technique after another, engulfing as many of them as he could, while taking advantage of every opportunity to charge toward the heavenly earth god. The most brutal battle had erupted. The heavenly sea god had never seen such an intense battle before. One planet after another was summoned, and he could sense that all of these planets were real. All of them had been compressed into high-density planets with diameters of several 100,000 feet. Regardless of whether it was their stellar power or their essential star cores, they were all identical to the planets in the universe. The heavenly earth god grabbed all of these planets and tossed them toward Enlin as if they were free. They were like pebbles being tossed at Enlin by the heavenly earth god. At this moment, boundless darkness would appear, and no matter how terrifying the planets were, they would all completely disappear upon falling into the darkness. Of course, Enlin would also make mistakes or be unable to hold on for much longer. Under those circumstances, he would be crushed by the planets, and in the worst-case scenario, he might even be pulverized. However, that didn't matter. The darkness would enshroud him, and when he emerged from the darkness, all of his injuries would be healed, and he would be back to full health. Enlin was bombarded by all types of terrifying planets. The heavenly earth god was also being bombarded by Enlin's torrential barrage of attacks. Countless darkness-type spell techniques were imbued with extremely potent penetrative power, and they were able to tear through the heavenly earth god's defenses before puncturing and engulfing his body. During the few dozen clashes, the heavenly earth god had been struck by the blades of darkness 16 times, with his head being sliced in half during the most severe attack. However, the boundless power of the earth on the entire Tai Chu continent was still able to quickly regenerate his divine body. The battle between the two sides was extremely intense and brutal. The heaven-crushing army of Yutong City was already used to seeing planets appear on the continent. They could fight all they wanted as long as the planets didn't crush them. This kind of grand battle was like a bizarre painting from the primeval times, embedded in the sky of the battlefield. Its appearance made everyone feel as if this battle had been elevated to a whole new level. All of the battles between swords and sabers were nothing more than child's play. Planets crashed into darkness, and darkness slayed gods. One devastating collision after another ensued. One planet after another was engulfed by darkness, and the light of the stars in the starry sky became dimmer and dimmer. Enlin was also becoming more and more exhausted after unleashing darkness over and over again. As paramount heavenly gods, the powers of earth and darkness were naturally extremely powerful. However, the beings who used them were restricted, and there was a limit to the amount of power they could draw upon. After countless intense collisions and battles, both sides showed signs of exhaustion. Enlin sliced the heavenly earth god in half with a single sword strike. The heavenly earth god's face was filled with agony as he absorbed the power of the earth to recover, and his recovery time was also several times slower than before. The heavenly earth god used the cursed demonic star to kill Enlin. In order to cleanse the boundless curses on the cursed demonic star, Enlin had to use his power of darkness to engulf the cursed demonic star, and his recovery time was also several times slower than before. The battle between the two of them had been earth-shattering and earth-shattering at the beginning. Now it had developed to a low ebb. The momentum wasn't as great as it had been at the beginning, but it was still very tragic. The number of times that both of them were half dead had not decreased, but had instead increased. Bam! Enlin was struck by another undead star, and he felt as if his consciousness were about to be torn apart by the planet. The heavenly earth god didn't even get a chance to laugh before his head was obliterated by a black ball. This was another one-for-one exchange. Chapter 2103. Damn it! The heavenly earth god's enraged roar reverberated throughout heaven and earth. Its body wobbled before falling toward the ground again. Enlin unleashed his darkness to engulf the undead star weighing down on his body. However, he was struck by an extremely uncomfortable feeling as if his body was very bloated. F***ck. He almost couldn't eat anymore. Just how many planets had he eaten? He couldn't even remember. All he knew was that he had eaten batch after batch of the most ferocious planets in the entire universe. If the darkness could engulf everything endlessly, then he might as well engulf the entire heaven and earth. It was quite clear that there was a time limit to this engulfment, and Enlin had already reached his limit. The heavenly earth god pulled up tens of thousands of mountains and combined them together to form a new head. He chortled with glee at the sight of Enlin's distressed expression. Enlin, you've finally reached your limit. Your end is coming. He pointed a finger toward the starry sky, and his voice was like a boundless divine decree. Karma Death Omen Star descend. All of the stars in the starry sky shuddered. The sound of air leaking erupted. After that, everything fell completely silent and nothing happened. The heavenly earth god. Enlin was ecstatic upon seeing this. Ha ha ha, you said I've reached my limit? Why are your stars bullsh asterisk-ting? Hurry up and throw planets at me. The heavenly earth god's expression had completely darkened. He pointed a finger toward the sky again. Great frost domain star descend. Try something with a lower difficulty. All of the stars in the starry sky shuddered again. PFFF. The sound of air leaking erupted, and all of the stars dimmed. The heavenly earth god. Haha. Keep going. Throw stars at me. Enlin chortled with glee as he hurriedly engulfed the stars weighing down on his body. If he didn't completely engulf them, they would hunt him down until the end of time. The heavenly earth god was extremely enraged, and he pointed at the starry sky again. Dagger star. This was the lowest difficulty. Even the weakest of the stars would be too embarrassing. However, a familiar scene appeared again. PFFF. All of the stars shuddered before dimming again. Ha ha. Ha ha. This is a dagger star? I'm afraid you're a sharp-edged little fart star, right? Enlin convulsed with laughter. He had already swallowed 80% of the evil undead stars on him. The heavenly earth god abruptly turned his gaze upon Enlin, and Enlin was instantly struck by a boundless chill and an extremely terrifying sense of pressure. The heavenly earth god stepped forward, covering several hundred kilometers in the blink of an eye as he charged toward Enlin. The terrifying power of the stars and the pure and violent power of the earth erupted from his fist before crashing viciously toward Enlin. Great earth exploding star, come. With that said, a huge fist smashed towards Enlin's face. Enlin was shocked. Wait, this is a fist, right? In order to save your dignity, you don't even want your face anymore? Shut up, the heavenly earth god roared as his fist descended. Enlin was in the midst of devouring the planet, so he couldn't dodge it for the time being, so he chose to face it head-on. Boom! The power of the earth had been elevated to its maximal extent, and it exploded forth as a golden shockwave, instantly reducing the remaining planets to dust. This was only the aftermath of a shockwave, and the majority of its power had fallen upon Enlin. and Lin mustered all of his power to defend himself, and his divine Tao of darkness fused into his flesh, bones, and skin, making his entire body pitch black. This was the darkness possession technique, which could engulf all types of power. It was the most practical and most energy-efficient technique for taking a beating. The power of the heavenly earth god's fist swept through heaven and earth, as if it were going to crush the entire world. And Lin stood at the center of the fist projection like a stubborn cockroach, enduring boundless pressure. His flesh, bones, and meridians were all trembling and ringing, as if they could collapse at any moment. The fist projection completely exploded, pulverizing the earth within a radius of several thousand kilometers and creating a crater of tens of thousands of meters. However, Lin was still standing at the center of the crater. He was using his hands to keep the heavenly earth god's massive fist at bay. The heavenly earth god's expression faltered upon seeing this. And Lin was standing like a man. All of a sudden, a sharp pain erupted from the heavenly earth god's hand. A pillar of darkness had pierced through his fist, and Lin flew out from the darkness, and his evil-slaying sword transformed into a series of afterimages as he slashed down toward the heavenly earth god's head. 6 strikes of the war god, Shadow Tiger. He was very fast, but the heavenly earth god's reactions were not slow either. The heavenly earth god's left hand erupted with boundless starlight before hurtling toward Lin at a speed that was close to the speed of light. And Lin was unable to ignore this power, and he could only defend himself with his sword. Boom, 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 starlight and darkness clashed, and a series of dazzling explosions erupted. And Lin's body was held at bay by countless streaks of silver starlight. A sinister smile appeared on the heavenly earth god's face. And Lin, in the past, you wouldn't have been stopped by a cheap trick like this. You're telling me you're still alive? In the past, you wouldn't have used a cheap trick like this either. And Lin sneered. Shut up. The heavenly earth god had already withdrawn his arm at this moment, and he swung it viciously toward Lin again. Evil sword technique, royal divine monarch. And Lin no longer chose to take a beating, and a peerlessly domineering sword projection erupted from his evil-slaying sword as he slashed toward the oncoming fist. Boom! The boundless power of earth clashed with the domineering power of darkness once again, splitting heaven and earth into 2 different types of energy. And Lin was blasted back over 50 kilometers by the power of earth, and the heavenly earth god was also forced back a few steps by the power of darkness. Again, and Lin's body faltered before he swung his sword toward the heavenly earth god again. You think I'm scared of you? The heavenly earth god roared with rage as his fist crashed toward Lin again. Another earth-shattering collision ensued, and the 2 of them were both blasted flying by their opponent's power. Immediately afterward, neither of them gave up and attacked one another again. Boom, boom, boom. The battle between the 2 of them was like a battle between 2 legendary gods who could easily crush stars. Their every move was capable of shattering heaven and earth, and mountains and rivers were crumbling. Explosions rang out incessantly between heaven and earth, echoing for an extremely long time. Before they knew it, their battle had become a melee battle. In reality, both of them knew that both of them had reached their limits. Under these circumstances, melee battles were the most efficient. The heavenly earth god had already transformed into a miniature form of over 100,000 feet tall in order to make melee battles more efficient. It was able to paralyze Lin's upper body, and Lin was able to dismember all of its limbs. In the end, the melee battle reached its climax, and Lin used his fist of the heavenly Tao and the power of darkness to blast the heavenly earth god's head. The heavenly earth god's fist was even more powerful, and it pulverized Lin into mincemeat. So what if he had reached the Tao integration stage? So what if he had attained phenomenal success in his divine body? So what if he had the power of darkness? In the face of the enraged heavenly earth god, even the slightest misstep would result in his death. Chapter 2104. Golden energy flowed on the ground of the Tai Shu continent before converging on a headless divine spirit. The purest power of the earth had been used to reconstruct its head. Darkness began to appear on the ground. A handsome man in a black feather robe slowly made his way out of the darkness. The man was trying to put on a nonchalant and domineering facade, but the cold sweat pouring down his forehead, his rapid breathing, and the trembling darkness had already betrayed his current state. And Lin discovered that his energy had been completely depleted. His body and consciousness had already reached a very high level of exhaustion. He looked at the mountainous divine spirit in the distance to find that it seemed to be in a similar state to him. The heavenly earth god wanted to disguise himself, but his face was simply too big, and he was unable to disguise any of his facial expressions. As such, he decided not to pretend anymore. And Lin, stop pretending. I know you've already reached your limit. Hee, aren't you also at your limit? I'm going to last longer than you anyway. The heavenly earth god repressed his rage. Show me your trump card. I know you're still conserving some of your power. You'll store a wisp of your power into the chaotic vortex behind you with each and every attack you unleash. You've probably accumulated quite a bit of power by now. Are you still not going to use it? And Lin was a little dazed, as if he didn't think that the heavenly earth god would be able to see through him. Hee, you're also conserving some trump cards, right? Why don't you use them first? And Lin chuckled coldly. The heavenly earth god was also dumbstruck. You know, no **T. Even you can see through my trump cards, so why can't I see through yours? And Lin's lips curled up into a smile, but his heart was throbbing with pain. He actually didn't know that the heavenly earth god had trump cards. Damn it, this is too hurtful. The heavenly earth god had seen through his dirty tricks, but he had failed to see through the heavenly earth god's dirty tricks. Even though he was thinking this, he couldn't appear to be at a disadvantage. He still had to put on a facade, as if he were on par with the heavenly earth god. Come, use your trump cards. I will receive all of them and grant you despair. The heavenly earth god's eyes were like a pair of burning suns as it stared at Lin, and the extreme light emanating from them seemed to be trying to pierce through and dispel the darkness around in Lin's body. And Lin regained his confident look. He placed his hand behind his back and smiled. I have a lot of trump cards. I'm afraid you won't be able to handle them if I use them. Still talking nonsense. The heavenly earth god's confidence seemed to have been boosted a little, and a disdainful expression appeared on his face. Everyone has already reached their limits. Do you want to win with your mouth now? My mouth. A smile suddenly appeared on Lin's face. You're right. All of a sudden, his storage ring flashed, and a bag appeared in his hand. Just as the heavenly earth god was rooted to the spot, and Lin brought out 4 pills, upon which phenomena instantly erupted into the heavens as rich pill power surged through the entire space. He swallowed all 4 pills in one gulp. Rumble. The majestic medicinal power began to quickly replenish in Lin's energy. The heavenly earth god. **CK. Pills were his trump cards. How shameless could he be? And Lin's hair suddenly turned crimson, and all of his muscles turned crimson, as if every single one of his cells was imbued with boundless energy. These 4 pills were all divine pills. 2 of them were recovery-type pills, while the other 2 were explosion-type pills. The divine Tao of darkness allowed Lin to absorb the power of the divine pills as quickly as possible. In the blink of an eye, Lin felt as if spring had arrived, and his parched body began to flow like a stream. However, it was only a stream. After all, his cultivation base was already too high. Even the power of 4 divine pills was no longer enough to satisfy his needs. Although he said that his status had already gone from a state of having very little HP and MP to a state of having very little HP and MP left. He could just about continue fighting, and Lin's eyes were glowing, and he was looking at the heavenly earth god in a different light. He waved a hand at the heavenly earth god. Both of us have reached our limits. Come, let's fight to the death. The heavenly earth god wanted to hurl abuse. How shameless must he be to say something like this? He had indeed reached his limit, but Lin was full of **King energy again. They were supposed to fight to their limits together, so why did he secretly take pills? The heavenly earth god became more and more enraged as he thought about it. Who would have thought that the heavenly darkness god's trump card would be to take pills? No, it was the heavens, but it couldn't do anything to Enlin. The heavenly earth god's mind was extremely active. However, Enlin wasn't going to give a chance to hurl insults at him. His body was like a bolt of lightning tearing through the heavens as he charged toward the heavenly earth god. Strike while he's down. Enlin felt like he was invincible under the effects of the pills. Hundredfold super chaotic darkness, holy flame, Kirin arm. Multiple heavenly god, heaven-crushing fist. All of the holy flames instantly erupted forth to revolve around his arm, and the chaotic power on his back also quickly spread to his arm at this moment. At the same time, the 7 Tao jades of the heavenly gods appeared, gathering the powers of wind, lightning, metal, mountain, fire, weather, and poison into his fist. The pure heaven-crushing true intent and the complete darkness divine Tao were like the finishing touch, forming the core of his fist's power. The fist hadn't even been unleashed yet. The heavenly earth god was astonished. It felt as if it could see a paramount heavenly god leading 7 heavenly gods toward it. Boundless might, power that made heaven and earth tremble, divine light that would never be extinguished. Is this your trump card? The heavenly darkness god. A determined expression appeared on the heavenly earth god's face, and he stamped his foot down, upon which the earth trembled as pure power of the earth surged forth from all directions. However, that wasn't the main point. The main point was that there was a power surging forth from underground. Not only was it the purest and most powerful power of the earth, but it was also the core of this world. This was near the White Nectar Sea, which was the central region of the Tai Chu continent. What was underground? The core of the earth, the core of the Tai Chu continent. At the same time, it was also the physical core of the entire Tai Chu continent. Smashing planets couldn't compare to smashing the Tai Chu continent at all. After all, the Tai Chu continent was the core of the entire realm of stars, and its core was the most important and most powerful existence. A burst of pure white energy from the core of the earth began to fuse into the heavenly earth god's body and into his fist, upon which an unimaginably terrifying might erupted forth. Neither side wasted any words as they both unleashed their fists at the same time. Bam! The 2 fists collided. Heaven and earth fell into an eerie silence at this moment. Immediately afterward, a singularity suddenly appeared at the center of the collision of the 2 fists. Then it crazily expanded and transformed into an infinite amount of energy, exploding like the Big Bang. The Great Tao began to crumble. Chapter 2105. The Great Tao of heaven and earth was the essence and truth of an entire world. The collapse of the Great Tao was countless times more severe than the shattering of space. In the worst-case scenario, the laws would be disrupted and destroyed, and in the worst-case scenario, the world would be destroyed. In that instant, Enlin could sense that countless laws were beginning to be disrupted and destroyed. His battle with the heavenly earth god had already left this entire world riddled with holes, and the energy explosion before his eyes was like the straw that broke the camel's back. It had completely exceeded the limits of this world. Boom! Terrifying destructive power exploded forth. The space within a radius of over 50 kilometers was pulverized. As the black and white chaotic turbulence wreaked havoc, countless laws were shattered, and some laws even inflicted backlash upon him. The heavenly earth god was not having it any better. His gargantuan body was cracked open by the backlash of the laws, and it looked as if it could crumble at any moment. The energy explosion quickly expanded to form a vibrant energy ball with a radius of several thousand kilometers, engulfing everything it came into contact with before quickly shrinking again when it reached its peak. It was like fireworks in the night sky. It was extremely dazzling, but it also cooled down very quickly. After the energy dissipated, both sides remained in their punching positions. There was no heaven and earth around them. Instead, there was an extremely chaotic and dangerous chaotic space. The space around them had already been destroyed, and it wouldn't be able to recover in a short time. The heavenly earth god looked at Enlin, whose dark feather robe was in tatters, and he was dripping with blood. Only half of his left arm remained, and his right arm was a mangled mess, upon which a smile instantly appeared on his face. And Lin looked at the heavenly earth god before him to find that his body was riddled with ghastly gashes. His left leg had been destroyed, his fist had been shattered, and half of his head had been blasted off by the shockwave of the explosion. It was clear that he hadn't been able to defend himself properly. And Lin also smiled upon seeing this. Both of us have used our final trump cards, and it seems that we've come to a draw, the heavenly earth god asked with a hint of a smile on his face. He knew that in order to combat the power of the Tai Chu continent's core, Lin had unleashed all of the dark energy that he had been secretly storing up. It's true that we've come to a draw, but what makes you think that we've both used our final trump cards? Lin asked with a smile on his face. What could it be? The heavenly earth god's expression shifted. At this time, Lin's fist had already descended. Take this. Rumble. The heavenly earth god had only just raised his hand to defend himself when Lin's fist flew through the air, pulverizing the heavenly earth god's already broken arm with absolute power. The heavenly earth god hurtled back in retreat. It had been too careless. Although Lin had used his full strength to fight it to a draw, it didn't mean that the other party didn't have any strength left. After all, he had only swallowed 4 godly pills, so it was normal for him to still have some strength left. It needed time. It needed the Tai Chu continent to transfer energy to it in order to continue battling. How could Lin not know this? He immediately threw caution to the wind and pounced toward his opponent. He knew that this was the heavenly earth god's weakest moment, and it was also the perfect opportunity to kill him. Everything around them had already been plunged into chaos and disorder, and the sky and earth were all extremely far away from them. This meant that it would be very difficult for the heavenly earth god to absorb the power of the earth on the Tai Chu continent. This was also something that was very beneficial to Lin. I'm going to kill you here. Lin pursued the heavenly earth god relentlessly, and the evil-slaying sword in his hand began to ring. Immediately afterward, a layer of pure and flawless golden light imbued with paramount might appeared over the sword. After progressing to the Tao integration stage, he was finally able to unleash this sword strike at will. 6 strikes of the war god, divine sword. Boom! The majestic and mighty golden light suddenly erupted and pierced through the endless chaos. A burst of sword Tao divine might that reached straight into the essence of the world swept toward the heavenly earth god before the sword had even descended, slicing a series of sword wounds into his extremely sturdy divine body. This sword technique, an expression of shock appeared on the heavenly earth god's face, and he felt as if his entire body was about to be sliced in half by the devastating sword intent. Sometimes he could already predict his own fate before the sword had even been unleashed. There was no helping it, as the sword Tao true intent and sword intent behind him were far too powerful. The heavenly earth god turned to look at Lin, only to find him wielding a golden divine sword that tore through chaos with unparalleled divine might, as if he were an invincible heavenly god who had descended upon the mortal world. A heavenly god paired with a divine sword. This was the final technique of the 6 strikes of the war god. The heavenly earth god knew that there was no way for him to evade this sword strike, and he suddenly turned around as the rich power of the earth erupted from his remaining arm. Boundless nebula essence exploded from his fist as he launched a vicious punch toward Lin. Die! Massive nebula fist. Countless silvery white nebulas exploded, blasting apart the terrifying chaos. Lin's expression was completely unfazed as he met the attack head-on, and his golden divine sword also fell at this moment. In an instant, a boundless and paramount golden sword projection lit up the boundless chaos before tearing through everything. The exploding nebulas were only able to last a few seconds in the face of the golden sword projection before being sliced in half by the extreme sharpness of the sword projection. This was a divine sword strike that could split chaos, slice through galaxies, and annihilate heavenly gods. The heavenly earth god was struck by a deep sense of powerlessness as he looked at the boundless golden sword projection. At the same time, fear and remorse welled up in his heart for the first time. This was supposed to be a sure-win situation. So how had he been forced into a corner? He had thought that he could kill Enlin with ease. So how did he end up being the one who had to kill him? Why was this happening? No one could answer the heavenly earth god's question. The domineering golden sword light slashed down on its head, cleaving its body cleanly into two halves. Furthermore, the peerlessly powerful sword projection didn't even spare the two halves of his body as it was pulverized into nothingness. The golden light dissipated, and Enlin was the only one left standing within the chaos. Everything had been settled. An extremely powerful being had been eliminated from the chaos, and it quickly began to heal. Enlin soon returned to the original battlefield. The heavenly sea god's eyes widened at the sight of Enlin's return, and it was clear that he was still in a state of shock. Even though he had envisioned this possibility, he was still extremely astonished when it actually happened. That was the true form of Tao. That was the ultimate form of a paramount heavenly god. To think that Enlin was able to defeat the heavenly earth god in such a state. He was simply ridiculously powerful. Enlin panted heavily, and his aura was extremely feeble as he stood on the spot. A relieved smile appeared on his face. We won. Rumble. The earth suddenly bulged before materializing into a greenish-yellow youth. There was a greenish-yellow divine halo above his head, but it was riddled with cracks. This was none other than the heavenly earth god that had just been slain. Enlin faltered slightly upon seeing the heavenly earth god's current appearance before a hint of a smile appeared on his face. Oh, you're not dead yet? I was just worried that I wouldn't be able to use my remaining trump cards. What other trump cards do you want to try? The heavenly earth god shuddered upon hearing this, and he immediately turned to flee into the distance with all his might. Chapter 2106. You want to run? Enlin was quite amused upon seeing this. Compared to the mighty and invincible heavenly earth god from before, the severely wounded heavenly earth god was like an infant that posed no threat at all. He took a step forward and gave chase. Brother Earth, don't run. Everyone is at their limits. It's time for a fight to the death. Hurry up and tell me, what trump card do you want me to use? Do you want to experience my ability to make money? Or do you want to experience my ability to crush the heavens? Of course, dark abilities are fine too. If you want to experience all types of powerful divine tools, I can satisfy that as well. Enlin chuckled sinisterly as he chased after the heavenly earth god. The heavenly earth god almost turned around and punched Enlin in the face upon hearing this. However, his rationality prevented him from doing so in the end as he continued to flee. At this moment, an enraged roar suddenly erupted in the distance. Enlin, let go of the heavenly earth god. Purple ocean prison. The heavenly sea god roared, and boundless purple seawater suddenly erupted into the sky before enveloping Enlin and the heavenly earth god. Very good. Hold off Enlin for me. The heavenly earth god was elated to see this. He then continued to charge forward. Bam! His head crashed into the purple ocean prison before being repelled. The heavenly earth god. You're telling me to let go of you, but you've trapped me in this prison as well? Heavenly sea god. The heavenly earth god turned to the heavenly sea god with an enraged expression. What are you waiting for? Hurry up and run. The heavenly sea god yelled in a panicked voice with concern on his face. The heavenly earth god suddenly felt like the heavenly sea god was even more detestable than Enlin. How could there be such a shameless person among the paramount heavenly gods? To think that he would actually dare to say such shameless words. The heavenly earth god didn't choose to forcibly break out of the heavenly sea god's prison. If they were to fight now, the heavenly sea god would definitely be able to pummel him. He transformed into a streak of greenish-yellow earth energy before charging toward the ground below. That's right, as long as he could fuse with the earth down below, he would be able to instantly teleport anywhere. He had been secretly preparing this technique for a long time, and it was finally ready. Heavenly God technique, earth transformation. The greenish-yellow earth energy struck the shattered ground like lightning. Everything had happened far too quickly, so quickly that all of Enlin's spell techniques were futile. The heavenly earth god was very confident that he would be able to escape. However, right at this moment, the space between heaven and earth suddenly congealed. Time also began to freeze in that instant, and everything became a frozen image, including the heavenly earth god's plummeting body. Time stood still. The chaotic, dark vortex behind Enlin began to spin rapidly, spreading darkness everywhere. Heavenly God, art endless darkness. Rumble. The vast earth was suddenly plunged into a boundless darkness. The heavenly earth god was very powerful, and he could only freeze time for a split second. However, this short period of time was just enough for Enlin to unleash his spell, plunging the world beneath him into boundless darkness. The heavenly earth god revealed his true form upon seeing the all-engulfing darkness down below. Time and darkness? How could this be? How can you still unleash such a large-scale spell technique? The heavenly earth god was already at the end of his rope, and he had thought that Enlin wouldn't have much power left. Who would have thought that he would still have so much power stored within his body? Enlin's body sprang through the air extremely quickly, and he only paused for a split second before appearing before the heavenly earth god in the blink of an eye. A cold light flashed from his evil-slaying sword as it stabbed toward the heavenly earth god's heart. The heavenly earth god raised a hand to defend himself, but the blade of the sword was enshrouded in darkness, and it pierced through his hand in the blink of an eye before plunging into his heart. Darkness flowed from the blade of the sword before slowly spreading toward the rest of the heavenly earth god's body. The heavenly earth god wanted to struggle, but the boundless darkness was sealing away his power and engulfing his entire being. He couldn't even muster up the power to struggle. Earth, everything has come to an end. Enlin's eyes were as clear as water as he spoke with a calm expression. Darkness, everything you've done is wrong. The heavenly earth god looked at the man before him and spoke with difficulty. You don't understand the heavenly Tao at all. I don't need to understand the heavenly Tao. All I need to understand is myself. Enlin smiled. After all, I am the heavens. The heavenly earth god, it's not up to you to decide what's right and what's wrong. Enlin twisted his sword, and pure darkness instantly engulfed the heavenly earth god's body. Farewell forever. Stay in the sky obediently. Crack, crack, crack. The heavenly earth god's halo tremored violently before exploding into countless specks of light that disappeared into thin air. Enlin looked on as an unknown power rose into the sky, and he exhaled lightly. It was finally over. The shattered space, the shattered earth, the boundless chaotic turbulence, and the laws of destruction were all telling of just how terrifying and devastating this battle had been. In the end, it was Enlin who stood until the very end and emerged as the final victor. Celestial music suddenly rang out in the sky, spreading across the boundless sky. This heavenly music was imbued with an extremely profound Tao realm. It was extremely pleasing to the ears. However, Enlin was quite taken aback upon hearing it. What was going on? Was there music to celebrate the victory? However, he soon discovered that he was wrong. This music was not for him. It was for the heavenly earth god. At this moment, the earth also began to glow with a greenish-yellow light, which was filled with sorrow and reluctance. The phenomenon swept through the entire Tai Chu continent. All of the living beings were struck by an indescribable sense of grief. Furthermore, all of the living beings had realized something, and that was that the heavenly earth god had fallen. All of the living beings who opposed the heavenly human tribe really wanted to burst into raucous laughter and celebrate, but they were unable to repress the grief being unleashed by the earth, and some of them even had tears streaming down their faces. This damned phenomenon of heaven and earth was a bully. The light goddess, who was battling Cyril, suddenly stopped fighting. Her face was filled with astonishment and incredulity as she stared at the phenomenon taking place before her. How could this be? The earth has fallen? Cyril was extremely elated, and a carefree smile appeared on his face. Good job, heavenly disciple Enlin. Not only did he complete his divine Tao of darkness, but he was also able to slay the heavenly earth god. Everything looks great. One of the three paramount heavenly gods had fallen, and this was extremely beneficial to the heaven-crushing sect. The light goddess was still unable to accept this reality. The earth and the ocean are two paramount existences, so how could they not even be able to deal with an incomplete darkness? No, there must be a problem somewhere. She felt like this was an absurd reality. No matter how she looked at it, victory was guaranteed. How had Enlin been able to destroy it? Enlin again. The light goddess was feeling a little lost for the first time in her rage. What was she supposed to do now? Chapter 2107. The divine light goddess was extremely astonished. At the same time, the confusion in her heart continued to spread. The situation had completely spiraled out of her control. She discovered that her game of chess was on the verge of collapse. No, she couldn't continue fighting like this. She had to investigate everything that had happened. Otherwise, if she continued to fight like this, she would eventually fall into the same trap as the heavenly earth god. The divine light goddess mind raced. She looked at Cyril, who was charging toward her again, and waved a hand. A ball of light enshrouded Cyril's body. Retreat. She spoke in a calm voice. Her body transformed into specks of light as she spoke. The four heavenly gods immediately stopped their attack on the heaven-crushing glazed palace and quickly flew toward the east. A young girl in a snow-white dress, who looked like a snow fairy, watched as the four heavenly gods fled. She pulled out a small pillar that was covered in countless crimson vein patterns and was just about to toss it out. Chin Chin held onto the young girl's hand and shook his head. Let them leave. It's not good for us to force the heavenly light goddess into a corner. Yes, Shui Yin nodded obediently. She didn't want Chun Chun to take on such a dangerous battle. They had won this battle. The phenomenon of the heavenly earth god's death spread throughout the entire Tai Chu continent. All living beings knew about this. They also guessed who had done it. Enlin had only just ascended to the godhood darkness realm, and a heavenly earth god had fallen not long after. If they couldn't guess who had done it, then they wouldn't even be worthy of being called a pig demon. After the phenomenon of the earth's death dissipated, all of the tribes on the Tai Chu continent celebrated. After crying against their will, they immediately began to laugh heartily and cheer loudly. They shouted things like, "Long live the heaven-crushing United Army," and "Heavenly God Enlin is bad *SS." The entire scene became livelier and livelier. Those who didn't know better would think that they had encountered a bunch of laughing and crying lunatics. The death of a paramount heavenly god was definitely the greatest piece of news in history. It wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that the entire world was celebrating. After all, one of the most powerful beings on the enemy side had fallen. Enlin was the first to shatter the myth of the paramount heavenly gods. Some of the living beings who had previously said that Enlin was only putting on an act and that there was no way he could match up to a supreme heavenly god, and that if the supreme heavenly god were to get serious, Enlin would be beaten to a pulp. Now, they were so ashamed that they couldn't even raise their heads. The friendly troops fought even more bravely. The atmosphere of the battlefield was originally one of fighting to the death and the solemn and stirring feeling of fighting to the last man. Now, it had turned into a feeling of their army's victory. The glory and confidence of the glorious continent seemed to have been injected with stimulants as they killed their enemies until they threw away their helmets and armor. All the armies on the continent that stood on the side of the humans had completely changed. As for the heavenly human tribe army, their morale had also completely changed. Each and every one of them looked as if their mother had died. They were either grieving or wailing. The heavenly human tribe powerful beings felt as if their faith had been completely shattered. Some of the heavenly human tribe powerful beings who had followed the heavenly earth god were even being punished by holy light. According to incomplete statistics, from the moment the heavenly earth god fell to the moment the phenomenon of heaven and earth had ended, there had been over 1 million heavenly human tribe powerful beings who had either committed suicide or died on a silver platter. The heavenly earth god was their only source of faith, and now that their faith had been destroyed, there was no point in them fighting anymore. However, compared to the heavenly human tribe powerful beings who had committed suicide, the vast majority of the heavenly human tribe powerful beings turned their grief into strength and continued to fight to the death. Revenge was their top priority. Even if they were going to die, they were going to take a few enemies down with them. The battles on the western and eastern battlefronts had come to an end, but the central battlefront was the battlefield with the most troops and the most top-notch experts. The battle was the most intense, and the war had not stopped yet. Heavenly God technique, myriad tree tassel, spring god enchantment. The heavenly wood god's entire body transformed into a tree man constructed from tree trunks, and it spread open its arms, upon which countless divine trees extended into the heavens. The especially powerful tree trunks were like azure dragons, twisting and twisting viciously around the immortal divine monkey. I'm so annoyed. The battling Buddha swung his golden-banded staff relentlessly toward the divine trees. But these divine trees had extremely powerful life forces, and even though they were smashed to smithereens by the battling Buddha's golden-banded staff, they sprang back up in the blink of an eye, making it impossible to kill all of them. The heavenly wood god knew that it was no match for the battling Buddha in a head-on battle, so it chose to engage in a battle of attrition. It was confident that it would be able to exhaust the battling Buddha to death with its many divine trees. Your individual combat prowess is indeed very powerful, but you won't be able to defeat me in a battle of numbers. The heavenly wood god stood at the top of the divine tree with a cold expression. That's because I have the entire spring. Boom! The battling Buddha's golden staff swept through the air and snapped all of the divine trees in half. However, there was no end to the divine trees, and they continued to converge toward the battling Buddha. You can't defeat me in a battle of numbers. The battling Buddha suddenly put down his golden-banded staff and allowed it to move on its own. At the same time, he grabbed onto the monkey fur on his head with both hands, and an extremely terrifying battle intent erupted from his body. Now, I'll show you what real quantity is. Battling Buddha, forbidden technique, myriad monkeys. Whoosh! Over 10,000 strands of monkey fur were suddenly plucked out. The battling Buddha's head was instantly plucked bald. Before the heavenly wood god had a chance to react, over 10,000 strands of golden monkey fur had already floated into the sky before transforming into over 10,000 powerful divine monkeys. All of them wore divine armor and wielded massive golden staffs. Their combined auras could only be described as apocalyptic. Charge! I'll show you just how powerful I am. There's so many trees. This is going to be fun. Watch my staff. Watch my staff as well. Countless monkey monarchs chattered within the spring god enchantment barrier as they unleashed destructive attacks, slicing the divine trees in half before unleashing true flames to incinerate them. Some of them even opened their mouths to chomp down on the divine trees. One divine tree after another was being destroyed at an incredible rate. They wanted to recover as quickly as possible, but as soon as their buds sprouted, they were flattened by the divine monkeys. The tables were instantly turned, and countless divine trees began to fall. The spring god enchantment barrier was unable to withstand the concentrated attacks of so many powerful beings, and its power began to crumble. These were 10,000 battling Buddhas. The heavenly wood god was completely dumbstruck. What kind of numbers were these? Who could stop them? The battling Buddha's actions sent chills running down its spine. This was the first time it had experienced just how powerful the bald battling Buddha was. There was a crisp explosion of the barrier. The spring god enchantment barrier was completely shattered by the monkey monarchs. All the divine trees, divine flowers, and divine fruits were ravaged by the monkey deities who wreaked havoc in the spring god realm. Right at this moment, the battling Buddha with the most powerful aura had already appeared before him. Blockhead brat, eat my staff. Bam! Chapter 2108. The heavenly wood god's head was struck by the club, and his vision darkened as his body smashed into the ground, creating a huge crater. At this moment, A large number of monkey gods had already swung their clubs toward the fallen heavenly wood god. Boom, boom, boom. A series of earth-shattering explosions rang out. The heavenly wood god's blood-curdling screams rang out. After a series of inhumane ravages, the monkey gods lost their energy and turned into white smoke before completely dissipating. All that was left was an extremely battered man sprawled on the ground. The heavenly wood god panted heavily. He felt like he had almost become the first heavenly god to be beaten to death. There were even a few more cracks on the divine halo on his head. He stood up with difficulty, but before he could even catch his breath, he saw the real victorious fighting Buddha descend from the sky. The Jingu Bang in his hand was like a giant pillar that supported the heavens, releasing boundless divine might. Heavenly Tao, bang! The huge staff descended, and the vast bottom of the huge staff enveloped the heavenly wood god, making it impossible for him to dodge. The heavenly wood god was also a decisive person, and he immediately clasped his hands together. Boundless flower, realm, holy lotus array. A strange holy lotus bloomed beneath the heavenly wood god's feet before wrapping around him like a flower bud. The holy lotus separated heaven and earth, and he wanted to use this opportunity to avoid the staff's attack. Right at this moment, the staff had already completely descended and viciously smashed into the holy lotus. As the golden light vibrated, the heaven-crushing might and the battle Buddha's might fused perfectly, producing some kind of qualitative change. For the sake of all living beings, Sun Wukong could put down the butcher's knife. And similarly, for the sake of all living beings, Sun Wukong could also pick up the butcher's knife, even if it meant destroying the heavens. Dying. The victorious fighting Buddha's eyes widened like a furious Vajra, and he used all his strength to strengthen the Jingu Bang in his hand. Boom, boom, boom. The Jingu Bang crushed everything and shattered space. Even the barrier between the two worlds created by the heavenly wood god's divine technique began to crack under its heavy attack. The Jingu Bang's divine might did not stop. It continued to stab the white holy lotus all the way into the ground. It continued to stab for hundreds of thousands of kilometers. The holy lotus was unable to bear the burden and was completely crushed into dust under the terrifying pressure. No! The heavenly wood god looked at the huge stick that was smashing down on his head, his face filled with fear and despair. This was the first time he felt so powerless in the face of an enemy's attack. Immediately after, his body was crushed by the mighty stick. Bang! Along with the heavenly wood god, the divine halo above his head also shattered. The giant stick began to shrink back and finally turned into a small golden needle, which was stuffed into Sun Wukong's ear. Goku looked at the bottomless pit and said, "Now, do you remember my name clearly?" The heavenly wood god did not have the chance to answer his question. However, Goku knew that the heavenly wood god would definitely remember his name before he died. Goku looked handsome as he gently stroked the hair on his head, but all he touched was a bald patch. The battling Buddha said, "It's just a fight, and I've beaten my head bald. The price is too high. However, won't I look more like a monk if I'm bald? TSK, a bald donkey?" Goku shook his head and waved his cudgel at the rest of the enemies. The battle was not over yet. Although he was exhausted and couldn't use any of his power, he could still bully low-level heavenly humans. On the top-notch battlefield, each and every one of the super experts began their decisive battle. In a place where sword chi soared into the sky was filled with sword chi. The essential sword Tao was being released relentlessly, and all the sword cultivators of the heaven-crushing United Army were unable to unleash a single sword strike within a radius of over 500 kilometers. All swords between heaven and earth had to bow before him. This was the special effect of the heavenly sword god after activating his 9th divine halo. He had activated his final divine halo in a suicidal manner and successfully grasped the essential sword Tao. It could be said that he was invincible in this world. However, he wasn't arrogant in the slightest as he was being thrashed. The heavenly sword god's face was swollen and bruised, and it unleashed one exquisite sword strike after another toward the true demon tribe Cultivator, only for the true demon tribe Cultivator to completely vanquish all of its attacks. Demon Emperor, see you chortle with glee. Is this all the heavenly human tribe's top-notch combat prowess is capable of? The heavenly sword god was enraged, but there was nothing he could do. The true demon tribe Cultivator before him was far more powerful than he had imagined. He had been thrashed by his opponent even before activating his divine halo. However, his opponent wasn't this powerful at the time. The heavenly sword god was confident that he would be able to thrash his opponent once he activated his divine halo. As a result, he activated one divine halo after another, and he became more and more powerful. However, Demon Emperor C, you continued to drink, and he became more and more intoxicated. Then, Demon Emperor C, you also became more and more powerful. Thus, the heavenly sword god continued to be thrashed with all of his divine halos activated. He activated his final divine halo and completely unleashed his heavenly god rank heavenly human tribe power. For a short period of time, his power was comparable to that of a god of creation. He had initially thought that he would finally be able to thrash his opponent. No matter how powerful Demon Emperor Cu was, he was only at the Tao integration stage, and there was no way he could cross that chasm no matter what. He was then greeted by the sight of Demon Emperor Cu pulling out a flask of divine wine from his storage ring before gulping it down in one go. After drinking, Demon Emperor Cu was completely inebriated. The heavenly sword god thought that his opponent had given up on healing him. He loved beating drunkards the most. And then he was thrashed. Never would the heavenly sword god have thought that Demon Emperor Cu would possess god of creation stage combat prowess after drinking divine wine. Was the heaven-crushing sect still hiding such a powerful trump card? Not only were their enemies astonished, but their allies were also astonished. Never would they have thought that aside from Enlin and Su Xiaolan, Demon Emperor C, you would also be performing so spectacularly. With his god of creation stage combat prowess, it could be said that he was the third most powerful being on the battlefield. The heaven-crushing sect really was full of hidden dragons and tigers. The morale of the heaven-crushing sect united army rose even higher. Their confidence in this battle was greatly boosted when their most powerful being was able to contend with the heavenly human tribe united army. The heavenly human tribe united army still had the numerical advantage, but they were unable to advance any further. Right at this moment, a shrill cry erupted. A massive vermilion bird over 10,000 feet in size was suddenly torn in half. Crimson blood splattered through the air like a rain of blood. The two halves of the vermilion bird didn't even get a chance to reconnect before they were incinerated into nothingness by surging crimson flames. Blood Fong divine vermilion bird. A series of cries of grief and indignation erupted. Rumble. The great Tao of heaven and earth wailed with grief. This was a sign that a Tao integration stage super mighty figure had fallen. The Blood Fong divine vermilion bird from the vermilion bird domain had fallen. Above the monstrous crimson flames, a 9th-level divine power, surging phoenix, stood proudly at the pinnacle of the heavens. Its eyes were filled with disdain and killing intent. The heavenly earth god is dead. I'm going to bury all of you with him. Chapter 2109. Blood Fong was the first Tao integration stage vermilion bird to perish in the vermilion bird tribe. After learning that the heavenly earth god had perished, Heavenly Phoenix Goddess chose to sacrifice her own life to activate her 9th divine halo in order to obtain the power to dominate the battlefield, all for the sake of eliminating all obstacles for the heavenly human tribe. The flying Phoenix God, who had 9 divine halos around her, was completely dominated by the 5 divine sparrows. Vermilion Bird Nanli, Vermilion Yuluo, Vermilion Huanjin, and Vermilion Tianjin were completely unable to stop the flying Phoenix God. They could only watch as Blood Fong was torn in half by the flying Phoenix God. All of the Vermilion Bird tribe, super mighty figures, were filled with grief and indignation. They had followed the great Empress Vermilion Bird from the faraway realm of stars to this place, and they had fought many bloody battles together. Thus, they had long since formed an inseparable comrade in arms. Now that one of their comrades in arms had suddenly perished, all of them were unable to restrain their grief and rage. Bloodfang, I'll avenge you. Damn it, kill this beast. The 4 vermilion birds at the Tao integration pinnacle stage roared as they unleashed their most powerful spell techniques toward the heavenly phoenix goddess in the sky. The Southly sacred fire was blazing and exploding. It surged up violently, as if it wanted to shatter the entire sky. The Empyrean god, soaring phoenix, glanced calmly at the sagifier, which had once caused it to tremble in fear. Then, with a flap of its wings, the incomparably powerful sagifier was dispersed by its terrifying wind pressure. Uluo Heavenrend. Vermilion bird Uluo suddenly appeared behind heavenly god Flying Phoenix, and its flames formed a sharp, dark spear that stabbed toward heavenly god Flying Phoenix's head. A calm smile appeared on Soaring Phoenix's face. I'll start with you. It did not turn around, nor did it dodge. A phoenix head suddenly grew out from its back, and then 2 thick arms emerged from its blazing body, grabbing the holy flame spear that was thrusting towards it. Sparrow Uluo was startled by this sudden development. At this moment, the Flying Phoenix god's head had already opened its mouth. Roar! The blood-red breath tore through the sky and crashed into Sparrow Uluo's body, engulfing it. Uluo. Sparrow Mirage Gold shot up from the bottom and slashed at the Flying Phoenix with its razor-sharp wings. It was so fast that it looked like a streak of golden light. Rip! Empyrean god Soaring Phoenix's abdomen was torn open by vermilion fantasy gold. At the same time, however, Empyrean Phoenix flattened Sparrow Phantasmal Gold's wings. It was at this moment that golden sacred fire burned the heavens and devoured the earth. It was as if the entire sky had been burned to ashes. Endless flames descended from the heavens and enveloped Empyrean god Soaring Phoenix. Heaven-crushing great empress, vermilion bird, eternal holy light. Sparrow Tianjin descended from the sky with holy flames that could incinerate the heavens before crashing viciously into the heavenly phoenix god's body. Empyrean god Soaring Phoenix let out a muffled groan as his body was blasted thousands of meters away by the scorching flames. Phoenix's pole, burning silence. Suddenly, Shueisha tore apart the heaven ash sacred flame. The true essence of the phoenix transformed into a red shadow that tore through everything and tore apart vermilion bird Tianjin's body before completely incinerating it. Sparrow Tianjin's anguished wail reverberated throughout heaven and earth before it was instantly engulfed by the flames. Empyrean god Soaring Phoenix flapped his wings and flew high into the air once more. He looked down at the army of trillions of soldiers on the ground, and his arrogance was suffused with a surging divine might. It was as if he didn't attach any importance to anything. Great Empress, vermilion bird, eternal holy light, it's all trash in the face of a heavenly god's divine might. Empyrean Phoenix spoke with a disdainful expression. He looked down on the vermilion bird's bootlicking behavior. A wisp of Uluo flame appeared in the sky, before expanding to become a gigantic vermilion Uluo. At the same time, the heaven ash flame appeared in the sky before expanding explosively. Finally, a vermilion bird Tianjin reappeared at the pinnacle of the heavens while exuding surging holy flames. The 2 vermilion birds that he had thought were dead had both been revived. This was the mystic technique unique to the 6 vermilion bird sages, rebirth from the ashes. As long as the vermilion bird bloodline essence wasn't completely destroyed, they could all be revived. How dare you look down on great Empress Vermilion Bird, huh? I have to kill it. What bullsh asterisk T Empyrean Phoenix God. I'm going to eat roast chicken tonight. The 4 vermilion birds were enraged upon hearing Empyrean Phoenix's words, and their holy flames erupted once again. Empyrean Phoenix furrowed its brows. Huh, it's that hard to kill. How troublesome. It spread open its wings as it spoke, and a boundless amount of scorching blood flowed from its body before materializing into a series of crimson spears. The divine halo above its head then erupted with boundless light and boundless power of essence, which seemed to be imbued with boundless hope and future, converged upon the crimson spears, making them translucent and translucent. The energy fluctuations emanating from them were also instantly elevated to a whole new level. The proud and confident vermilion birds couldn't help but feel a sense of horror at the sight of these spears. They wanted to submit. They knew that these spears could instantly wipe out their bloodlines. Heavenly God technique, world creation spears. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. 4 powerful spears were aimed at the 4 vermilion birds. So what if you're vermilion birds? In my eyes, you're nothing more than ants. A cruel smile appeared on Empyrean Phoenix's face. I'm going to kill all of you in one go. Empyrean Phoenix's voice had only just fallen when the world creation spears whistled through the air toward the vermilion birds. The vermilion birds unleashed holy flames to attack the spears, but the spears were extremely fearsome and could tear through flames of any level as they hurtled toward the vermilion birds' hearts with boundless killing intent. They were screwed. This was what the 4 vermilion birds were truly thinking. The world creation spears were imbued with boundless divine might, and almost no one dared to look directly at them. However, right at this moment, the crisp cry of a vermilion bird erupted into the heavens. Immediately afterward, an indescribably mighty and holy vermilion bird spread open its wings, obscuring the entire sky as it stood in front of the 2 spears. An azure dragon appeared, winding about and blocking in front of one of the light spears. Boom! The spear clashed with the vermilion bird and the azure dragon, and the resulting explosion was like a dazzling sun illuminating the night sky. Countless living beings were astonished by the terrifying explosion and shockwaves. The final spear flew directly toward the heavenly ash vermilion bird. An exquisitely beautiful azure robe appeared before the heavenly ash vermilion bird, and she was holding a heavenly goddess with a cracked divine halo in her hand. All of the beautiful faces on the heavenly goddess body were filled with shock and horror. No, the heavenly goddess was none other than heavenly goddess Myriad Transformations, and she immediately used human faces to construct an ever-changing shield in front of her. However, the trump card of a 9th-level heavenly god was not that easy to defend against. The spear of light only paused for a split second before piercing through the shield, before stabbing into heavenly goddess Myriad Transformations' body. The pure power of light purified everything within her body, and her entire body was reduced to specks of light amid her blood-curdling cries of despair. At the same time, the vermilion bird and the azure dragon disappeared after blocking the 3 world creation spears. Silence, deathly silence. All of the living beings who were paying attention to the battle were astonished. The flying phoenix goddess was also dumbstruck. The azure-robed woman was a peerlessly beautiful woman. Her clear, limpid eyes stared calmly at Empyrean God's soaring phoenix as she said, "Congratulations. You've killed an Empyrean God." Chapter 21:10. That's right, Heavenly Phoenix Goddess had indeed slain Heavenly God Myriad Transformations. At the very least, that was what it looked like on the surface. It was exactly because of this that countless people felt their flesh crawl. Just who could make a heavenly deity kill another heavenly deity? This was an unprecedented feat to the Allies. This operation could be described as satisfying, but to the enemies, it was an unimaginable humiliation. At this moment, there was only one word in the minds of the heaven-crushing United Army. Bad *SS. Great Empress Vermilion Bird. Great Empress Vermilion Bird is here. She saved our lives again. Long live Great Empress Vermilion Bird. All of the vermilion birds' eyes lit up like the sun upon seeing this, and they cried tears of gratitude. Didn't Heavenly Phoenix Goddess humiliate our great Empress? She was still so arrogant and haughty, as if she were the most powerful bird in this world. Look at her now. She's been punished by the great Empress. This Heavenly Phoenix Goddess is quite something. She's still trying to drag a heavenly god down with her, even in death. Heavenly Phoenix Goddess's body trembled uncontrollably as an indescribable sense of guilt and humiliation engulfed it. Ah, Divine Phoenix Maiden, I'm going to kill you. Heavenly Phoenix Goddess exploded. Su Xiaolan's expression remained calm as she glanced at the 4 vermilion birds. Let's switch opponents. The 4 vermilion birds instantly understood, and they all turned to look at Heavenly Goddess Silent Sound and Heavenly Goddess Solitary Star with mysterious smiles on their faces. We're willing to serve the great Empress. Charge! The 4 vermilion birds spread their wings and pounced toward the 2 heavenly gods. Heavenly Phoenix Goddess was enraged by the sight of the vermilion bird, whom it had already condemned to death, attacking the other heavenly gods. It was just about to give chase when Su Xiaolan charged toward it with her dragon sparrow sword. All right, I'll kill you first. Heavenly Phoenix Goddess didn't waste any more time. She immediately unleashed her paramount power of light and imbued it with flames, which surged toward the oncoming Su Xiaolan. These flames were originally holy flames, but after fusing with the power of the light god, they evolved to become even more powerful flames. These were flames that could strike fear into the hearts of even gods of creation. The flames that contained the power of light crashed into the woman's body. Su Xiaolan didn't make any extra movements and just slashed with her sword. The vermilion sword projection pierced through heaven and earth. The eternal, deathless power of the vermilion bird essence and the sage birth was unleashed to the pinnacle, and the radiant flames toward each other. The sword projection contained the power of eternal indestructibility. After a brief clash, it broke through the flames of light and landed on Empyrean God Soaring Phoenix's body, tearing a massive, bloody wound into its body. The phoenix sobbed in the sky. The azure-robed woman's expression was still calm. She brandished the Thunderfire sword as if she was taking a stroll in her own backyard. What? You don't know who you are anymore after your power skyrocketed? How dare you insult me and kill my most loyal subordinates? Are you prepared to pay with your blood? The green-clothed woman flicked her sharp sword, and another heavenly light sword shadow flashed past. Heavenly God technique, Phoenix Shadow. Empyrean God Soaring Phoenix was truly scared now, and its speed increased by close to tenfold. It transformed into a crimson shadow and finally managed to evade Su Xiaolan's sword strike. Oh, interesting. The projections of the vermilion bird and the azure dragon flashed past Su Xiaolan's eyes, and she immediately turned around to slash behind her. Bam! The blade of the sword clashed with Empyrean God Soaring Phoenix's claws. A crimson explosion erupted in the air. You can keep up with my speed? Empyrean God Soaring Phoenix was astonished once again. This was the result of its heavenly God technique. Just as it didn't have a chance to retreat, Su Xiaolan's sword was already upon it, and it was astonished to find that her sword was even faster than it was. Countless sword wounds began to appear on Empyrean God Soaring Phoenix's body. Empyrean God Soaring Phoenix let loose a blood-curdling wail as it hurtled back in retreat. However, Su Xiaolan continued to pursue it with her dragon sparrow sword in hand. Even though you'll die when the time comes, but I'm more inclined to slash you to death. A cold light flashed through Su Xiaolan's eyes, and the dragon sparrow sword in her hand shimmered with a sword projection that struck fear into the hearts of even the heavenly gods. A series of dazzling sword projections tore through the air. Empyrean God Soaring Phoenix's blood-curdling cries reverberated through the air. A scorching rain of blood fell relentlessly. Countless living beings looked up at the woman dancing in the air with reverence and awe in their eyes. Such an invincible figure would forever be engraved into their hearts. Who was the most noble and proud being on this battlefield? It wasn't the heavenly god, nor was it the Empyrean God Soaring Phoenix who had deactivated all 9 of his divine halos. Instead, it was the human woman with the title of Divine Phoenix Maiden. Her radiance even illuminated half of the battlefield. She brought hope to countless living beings who were fighting for their lives. More and more wounds appeared on Empyrean god Soaring Phoenix's body, and its injuries became more and more severe. It knew that its injuries were becoming more and more severe, and the time for its backlash to strike was quickly approaching. No, this woman was far too terrifying. It had to unleash its most powerful attack in order to defeat her. Empyrean god Soaring Phoenix made up its mind. Even if it had to die on the spot, it had to kill this powerful enemy. Time to go all out. Heavenly God technique, light possession. Empyrean god Soaring Phoenix spread its wings and flew into the sky. At the pinnacle of the heavens, the powerful power of light descended from the sky. However, right at this moment, a series of chains of lightning pierced through the air and latched onto its wings at an even faster speed, causing it to falter momentarily. Empyrean god Soaring Phoenix didn't even have a chance to be baptized by the power of light before it saw Su Xiaolan rushing toward it. In that instant, it felt as if it could see a peerlessly tall and mighty being standing before it. Her figure was immortal and had existed for countless years. Just the movement of her body alone was enough to affect the entire universe. She was staring at it as if it were a speck of dust. This is the true vermilion bird. Empyrean god's eyes widened. Yes, Su Xiaolan's sword fell. A vermilion bird constructed from essential flames leaped out from the sword strike and tore through Empyrean god Soaring Phoenix's body before incinerating it to ashes. The divine halo crumbled and transformed into specks of light that returned to the heavenly Tao. All of the heavenly gods on the battlefield were dumbstruck once again. A heavenly god who had activated his 9th divine halo couldn't even unleash his final trump card before being slain by a single sword strike from Su Xiaolan. Empyrean god Soaring Phoenix was the embodiment of all of the heavenly gods on the battlefield. Not only had it accidentally killed an ally, but it didn't even get a chance to unleash its final trump card before it was slain by its enemy. Could it be any worse? Su Xiaolan's expression remained extremely calm as she basked in the scorching holy flame before everyone's respectful and admiring eyes. However, her expression changed slightly as she looked at the power of light that had dissipated halfway through its descent. Why was it that the final divine halos of divine heaven stage heavenly humans were all replicas of the paramount heavenly gods' divine halos? But there were no differences between the divine halos of the other paramount heavenly gods. What about divine halos of life, ocean, earth, and sky? She was pondering this question. Chapter 2111. Within the 10,000 spirits immortal sect of the kingdom of the 9 states. The auras of the 3 golden-furred snow ghost beasts soared into the sky. Roar! Kill, 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 kill for the goddess of light. One of the golden-furred snow ghostly beasts stomped down on a black dragon that had been completely frozen by the power of extreme frost, shattering the layers of ice and flesh with a single stomp. Some of the more fragile parts of the beast were even shattered into ice shards. Junior disciple brother Xiao too. Xiao Zhe yelled in horror upon seeing this. "It's all right, brother Xiao Zhe. I can still revive." Xiao Tu's heart was filled with warmth at the sight of the black dragon grieving for him. "But I can't revive." Tears streamed down Xiao Zhe's face. "What will I do if you leave?" Xiao Tu. This was not a problem that he could solve. A blood-red cross suddenly leaped out of the snow ghost glabella, forming 4 giant crosses in the 4 directions of the void, sealing both the space and the divine soul. It stared at Xiao Tu and Xiao Zhe with a sinister smile. "Both of you must die." Xiao Tu had a bad feeling about this. It seemed like the difficulty of his revival had increased. These 4 crosses were imbued with the power of the heavenly gods, and they possessed the power to control everything. "It's over, it's over, it's over." This was the first time Xiao Tu had felt like he was going to die in the face of death. The last time he had felt this was when he was facing the heavenly light goddess. The 2 black dragons had both thought that they were going to be the first ones to be dragged down. However, to their surprise, the battle between the snow maidens was even more intense and desperate. Boom! The golden fur snow ghost beast moved like a bolt of golden lightning, perfectly evading the earth-shattering ice spell techniques unleashed by Shangguan, before crushing the Snow Tribe Great Empress body with a single punch. The Great Empress threw up a mouthful of blood as she flew through the air, and her body transformed into countless snowflakes before disappearing. In the next instant, she appeared on a mountain tens of thousands of meters away. However, to her surprise, a frost power trap had already been set up there. The power of frost suddenly erupted and froze her body solid. Her exquisitely beautiful features and panicked expression both froze in place at this moment. The Great Empress of the Snow Tribe would be sealed in ice. This was a massive humiliation, and no one would dare to believe it. However, it had really happened now. This was the complete suppression of the power of cold. The snow ghost beasts had the highest authority to control the power of ice and snow. They controlled all ice and snow laws and were truly at the level of a heavenly god. They were the true rulers of ice and snow. A golden-haired figure suddenly appeared behind the Empress. It was the ghoul beast with the halo above its head. The ghoul beast smiled and said in a hoarse voice, "The strongest cultivator of the Snow Clan? That's all there is to it. Great Empress." Shangguan rushed toward the snow ghost beast with a panicked expression. The snow ghost beast didn't even spare Shangguan a glance as it viciously stabbed its claws toward the frozen Great Empress. "No!" Shangguan yelled as she slashed her ice saber through the air toward the snow demon beast at an extremely fast speed. However, she was still too slow. In the blink of an eye, the snow ghost beast's sharp claws pierced through the ice and the Empress's delicate body. Only then did Shangguan Yi's ice slash land on the snow ghost beast's body, but it only left a small gash on its body. It didn't even tremble in the face of this degree of injury. "Piss off, trash. I'll deal with you later." The snow ghost beast extended a palm toward the oncoming Shangguan Yi, and a boundless frosty power imbued with the power of the paramount laws of ice crashed into Shangguan Yi's body, sending her flying through the air as she threw up a mouthful of blood. Her entire body was instantly frozen solid, rendering her completely powerless. Shangguan Yi tumbled to the ground and propped herself up with great difficulty as she looked up at the frozen Great Empress. The ice around the Great Empress was finally broken, and a disheveled Great Empress with several bloody holes on her body appeared. She flew back in retreat, but the golden snow ghost beast was still chasing after her with a sinister smile on its face. Its sharp claws transformed into crimson saber projections as it sliced through the Great Empress attacks and closed the distance between them in a frenzy. It looked like it was trying to kill her on the spot. After battling for so long, Shangguan Yi and the Great Empress were both completely exhausted. However, the snow ghost beast was still full of energy, and this put the two women in a dire situation. Shangguan Yi struggled to her feet before charging toward the snow ghost beast again. "You still don't know what's good for you." The snow ghost beast unleashed another vicious slap toward Shangguan Yi. Ice and snow imbued with extreme frost intent exploded forth, sending Shangguan Yi flying again. The Great Empress immediately took advantage of this opportunity to attack Shangguan Yi. Instead of retreating, she materialized a holy ice sword in her hand and instantly stabbed the ice sword into the snow ghost beast's chest like a bolt of lightning. "Die!" The Great Empress unleashed her frosty divine Tao with all her might, and her exquisitely beautiful face was filled with determination as boundless blue frosty divine Tao flowed through the wound and spread throughout the snow ghost beast's body. Crack! The snow ghost beast suddenly gripped the ice sword tightly in its paws. The Great Empress faltered for a moment before she saw the horrifying smile on the snow ghost beast's face. Immediately afterward, her frosty divine Tao was suppressed by an extremely pure frosty power. Not only that, but the frosty power also flowed along the blade of her sword and into her body. The Great Empress wanted to run away, but she discovered that her hand had already been frozen solid by the frosty power that was crawling up the ice sword. Rip! Blood splattered through the air as the Great Empress severed her own arm, The snow ghost beast was slightly taken aback by her decisiveness. At this moment, the great empress had already taken advantage of this opportunity to quickly retreat. Trying to run? Do you really think you can survive by running away? The snow ghost beast chased after the great empress with a sinister smile on its face. Let go of the great empress. Shangguan roared in rage as she charged toward the snow ghost beast again. Her entire body exuded a frosty aura that was powerful enough to freeze heaven and earth. 8th-stage Ice God, Heavenly Frost Palm. She clenched her slender fingers together and raised her palm, preparing to strike the snow ghost beast before her. The snow ghost beast suddenly turned around and instantly pulled out the ice sword that was still embedded in its body before stabbing it into Shangguan Yi's heart, pinning her to the snowy ground. Its speed was even faster than Shangguan Yi's attack. How? How could it be so powerful? Countless drops of icy blue blood splattered through the air. Shangguan Yi's body had been punctured, and she was unable to unleash her full power. She could only stare with wide eyes at the snow ghost beast with incredulity in her eyes. The snow ghost beast grinned, revealing 2 rows of sharp fangs. I've always been like this. You're the ones who have become weaker. This was the most despairing thing for Shangguan Yi. They had been battling for almost an entire day and night and had used up all of their pills. In the end, they were still unable to escape the fate of being completely exhausted. However, these snow ghost beasts seemed to never tire, and they were still in their prime. Also, the most important point, the snow ghost beast stared at the woman who had been pinned to the ground by the ice sword, and countless sharp icicles appeared in the air. You dare to compete with me in ice and snow? Don't you know that I'm a god in this field? It should be fun to die at the hands of the power that you're most proficient in, right? The snow ghost beast chuckled with mockery in its eyes as countless icicles descended with absolute killing intent. Chapter 21:12. Shangguan Yi stared at the descending icicle and tried to struggle free with all her might, but the ice sword that had pierced into her chest had already been frozen solid. She was completely unable to struggle free and could only look on as the icicle fell upon her. Right at this moment, the great empress, who was riddled with wounds, appeared in front of her and spread open her arms. Countless ice shards hurtled toward her, but the great empress was like a massive boulder that shielded her from the wind and rain. One ice shard after another was blocked by the great empress divine Tao, but there were also ice shards that pierced through her divine Tao and into her body. Before she knew it, blood had already stained her entire imperial robe. No! Tears welled up in Shangguan Yi's eyes upon seeing this. Ice Matriarch, run! The great empress gritted her teeth, and even in the face of the relentless onslaught of ice shards, she still managed to conjure up a burst of frosty divine Tao behind her to melt the sword in Shangguan Yi's chest. However, the sword was not completely melted. A purple spear of ice suddenly flew toward her, piercing through the great empress' protective divine Tao and pinning her body to the ground. The snow ghost beast's sinister face appeared before her again. So you care about her that much? That's killing 2 birds with 1 stone. Its claws began to glow with a red light as it made its way toward the great empress. It turned to Shangguan Yi as it spoke, and its smile widened. Did you know? You're hated by the heavens, and you're going to suffer for the rest of your life. Not only that, but everyone around you will also suffer misfortune along with you. Shangguan Yi's mouth gaped open upon hearing this, and a conflicted and pained expression appeared on her face. No, Ice Matriarch, don't believe it. It's spouting nonsense. She didn't even get a chance to finish her sentence before a crimson claw suddenly pierced through her lower abdomen and exited through her back, upon which she let loose a pained moan. See that? Your great empress is being tortured because of you. The snow ghost beast chuckled as it looked at the pained and remorseful Shangguan Yi. For some reason, it instinctively wanted to torture Shangguan Yi. Look at what the snow maidens have become ever since you joined them. They've lost their homes, and they've even been forced to join their former enemies and risk their lives for the sake of the human race. No, it's not like this. The empress shook her head continuously. Did I allow you to speak? With a flick of the snow ghost beast's finger, the red ray pierced through the Empress's throat. Fresh blood splattered all over the snow-white ground, accompanied by an extremely painful groan. Shangguan Yi's pupils contracted as she desperately tried to break free. However, the snow demon beast wasn't going to let her do as she pleased, and it continued to reinforce its restraints. Look at the 4-9 immortal sect that you've joined. It's currently being hunted down by 3 heavenly gods. After I kill you, I can continue to kill them. None of them would survive, and their fates are all because of you. It was your arrival that brought misfortune to them. Someone like you is constantly bringing destruction and disaster to others. Anyone who stays by your side will never have a good ending. How do you even have the face to live until now? The snow ghost beast's words were like sharp knives stabbing into Shangguan Yi's chest as it enunciated each and every word. Shangguan Yi's expression faltered upon hearing this. She looked at the 2 frozen black dragons, then at Dongfang Zhuangshi and Little Huang, then at the great empress who was on the brink of death, and her heart throbbed with pain. She was right. She was already so unlucky. So why didn't she give up? Why did she still want to join everyone's lives? Someone like her shouldn't be here. The snow ghost beast became even more elated at the sight of Shangguan Yi's pained expression. It was as if the heavenly Tao was supporting its decision. It pulled its sharp claws out of the great empress' abdomen before continuing to slice off her legs. The great empress gritted her teeth as excruciating pain coursed through her entire body. She was unable to make any sound from her punctured throat, but she still managed to transmit her voice with great difficulty. Ice Matriarch, don't listen to its words. We're following you out of our own free will. I believe that the people of the 4-9 immortal sect also truly like you. They don't despise you at all. Shangguan Yi bit down on her lower lip, and her body trembled uncontrollably as she looked at the great empress, who had been tortured beyond recognition. You don't despise me, but I despise myself. I really want to have friends, and I really want to live happily with everyone. I'm also working hard, working harder than countless others. The great empress spoke in a quiet voice, and there were already traces of tears on her face. But what can I do? Reality is like this. Everything that happens to me is unfortunate, and the friends around me will also encounter misfortune. I have never brought them peace and happiness. Do I really deserve to stay by their side? Just like right now. You've all become like this, but I can't do anything. I can't do anything. I hate who I am right now, and I don't want to continue like this. Shangguan Yi's voice was very soft, but each and every word seemed to be dripping with blood. The great empress didn't know how to comfort Shangguan Yi. Shangguan Yi had already proven herself to be unlucky. This was something that no one could deny. Hence, the great empress knew that normal words of comfort could have the opposite effect. Right at this moment, a sharp pain shot through her arm. The snow demon beast had already severed her arm, and her body was pinned to the ground. Even her vision was beginning to blur. She was about to die, but she was still thinking about how to comfort Shangguan Yi. The great empress of the snow tribe couldn't help but smile as she turned to look at Shangguan Yi with a reluctant expression. Ice Matriarch, Xiao Ying has to go first. At this moment, the snow demon beast also felt like the great empress was about to die. It had tortured her so many times, and it was time to put an end to her. Release her. A weak voice that sounded like a raving could be heard. The snow demon beast's claws paused in midair, and it cocked its head to the side as it looked at the frozen woman. Release her, the woman continued. Oi, did I hear that right? The snow demon beast chuckled. What are you thinking? You want me to release her? Why do you have to order me around? You must be in a lot of pain. Don't worry, I'll release you after I kill her. The snow demon beast was in a very good mood. It stabbed its claws toward the great empress as it spoke. I said, I told you to release her. An enraged roar erupted like the roar of snow and ice. A ball of blue energy exploded forth, instantly freezing the snow demon beast's body in place. The explosion was like a massive blue snow lotus blooming between heaven and earth. Frosty energy soared into the heavens and froze heaven and earth in that instant. Chapter 21:13. The snow demon beast was struck by an unprecedented frosty power. It raised its claws, which were meant to end the great empress' life, but they were unable to descend. An indescribable sense of horror engulfed the snow demon beast's entire body. At the very center of the blossoming blue snow lotus, there was an exquisitely beautiful woman hovering in midair. Her eyes had turned an icy blue color, and the divine seal above her head suddenly cracked open before disappearing. In its place was a boundless, terrifying aura. There was an inky black rift in front of Shangwan-Yi, within which was boundless chaos. Just like that, she wielded the ice sword and slashed at the crack. Heaven splitting. In that instant, it was as if heaven and earth had just been created. Boundless light erupted from the rift, giving everyone the impression of boundless chaos and nothingness. Boundless laws and matter suddenly surged forth. This was an extremely mighty and incomprehensible moment. The woman was bathed in a peculiar divine light, and she was like a proud and arrogant goddess who ruled over everything. There was already a large world, but in that instant, a brand new world was born from the blade of her icy blue sword. The three golden-furred snow ghostly beasts were all dumbfounded. They had been able to maintain their composure despite being assaulted by the cold, but they were completely stunned by the sight of a woman using an ice sword to open up a new world. Opening up a new world, that was something that only a god of creation could do. Could it be that a Tao integration stage snow maiden had suddenly progressed to the god of creation stage? God of creation stage beings were no match for Dubai. Even on the Tai Chu continent, where there were countless powerful beings, god of creation stage beings were extremely rare. They were legendary beings that would only appear once every million years. Once a god of creation stage being appeared, they could easily rule over an entire region and dominate an entire tribe. And now, one of them had suddenly appeared right before their eyes? Be *starred. Why are you spouting nonsense? Why don't you just take care of her as soon as possible? The golden snow demon beast that was torturing Xiao Zhe and Xiao Tu roared with rage at the snow demon beast before Shangwan-Yi. The snow demon beast before Shangwan-Yi shuddered. Weren't you torturing those two black dragons as well? It was just that I was unlucky. Snow howled through the air. The sky turned frosty. Shangwan-Yi's aura continued to climb explosively as her aura became more and more powerful. Her snow priestess robe fluttered in the wind, and she appeared like a holy lotus blossoming between heaven and earth. Her body glowed with a blue and white divine light. Her bones were made of jade, her skin was made of ice and snow, and her body was imbued with the heart of creation. I am the ruler of ice and snow. A clear and ethereal voice resounded throughout the world. At this moment, the unique snowstorm crazily expanded for millions of li. The entire wind plain state was engulfed by this strange snowstorm. The extreme cold brought about by the snow ghost beasts was forced back by the snowstorm. They were all creatures that were forced to a dead end by the disastrous snowstorm. Experts were curled up in a corner, struggling to survive. Suddenly, he felt a gust of warm wind, blowing away the coldness and pain in his body. Heavy snow was still falling from the sky, but every snowflake was shining with golden light. A man stretched out his trembling hand and caught a few snowflakes. The snowflakes melted in his palm, and suddenly, a warm current flowed into his body from his palm, warming his entire body. This made him incomparably surprised. This is warm snow? The ice and snow covering the bodies of countless frozen creatures began to melt. One after another, living beings with strong life force began to awaken. They looked at the warm snow falling before their eyes with a dazed expression. Their memories were still stuck in the despair and terror they felt before the disaster struck. However, all of this seemed to have been soothed by the warm snow. At this moment, everyone's perception of snow had been completely refreshed. This snow actually had the ability to heal people's hearts. Crap, our extreme cold energy has all been driven out of the kingdom of the 9 states. One of the golden snow ghost beasts exclaimed in shock. It must be that snow maiden. How the hell is she able to do this? She's been able to drive out the extreme cold energy that we've been preparing for so long on her own. How is this possible? Even the snow has become warm. Is this still snow? The golden snow ghost beast was both shocked and enraged. Shangguan, he made a divine seal and stared calmly at the snow ghost beasts before her. She was very unfortunate, but in her heart, she really hoped that this world would accept her and that her friends and companions would like her. At the very least, when she had the power, she wanted to do everything in her power to protect the people around her. She wanted to do everything in her power to warm the hearts of all those who were suffering in this world. This was why the world was filled with warm snow. Because of the constant loss, because of the constant suffering, and because of the acceptance and tolerance of her friends, she loved this world more than anyone else. I am the Ice Matriarch. I call the shots on all the ice and snow in this world. The snow can be whatever I say it should be. All of the snow ghost beasts and the 4-9 immortal sect cultivators were astonished upon hearing this. She had used the calmest voice to say the coolest words. Shangguan, he had done it. Holy F *CK. This woman sure is arrogant. She's not in the right state. We can beat her if we attack together. The 3 golden snow ghost beasts exchanged a meaningful glance. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. They transformed into 3 streaks of golden light before attacking Shangguan from 3 different directions at the same time. Shangguan stabbed her slender hand into the air and pulled out a snowy white divine staff constructed entirely from ice and snow before instantly appearing before the snow ghost beast that was torturing the great empress. So fast, the golden snow ghost beast's expression shifted drastically, but it also reacted in the shortest time possible. The power of extreme frost instantly burst forth as its claws transformed into crimson projections that pierced toward different vital spots on Shangguan Yi's body. However, right at this moment, it suddenly felt like its movements had slowed down, as if it were moving in slow motion. An unimaginable burst of extreme frost enshrouded its body and seeped into its bones. The sky turned inky black. The earth turned pale white. The space it was situated in became an indestructible deep blue. Impossible. This is impossible. How can this power of extreme frost be so powerful? How can it even force back my powers of the heavenly gods? An expression of shock and horror appeared on the snow ghost beast's face. Its body had already been frozen to the point where it couldn't even move. At this moment, its head had already been trampled viciously by a foot. Boom! The golden snow ghost beast was stomped into the ground, and its head was almost split open like a watermelon by the power of extreme frost. It tried to resist, but the bottom of the snowy white divine staff had already punctured its heart like a sharp spear. The terrifying power of extreme frost surged through its entire body in that instant, destroying its bodily functions in a frenzy. This scene was extremely similar to what had happened to the great empress. Didn't you say you're the ruler of ice and snow? Shangguan looked down at the trembling snow ghost beast beneath her feet with a pair of merciless eyes. What about now? Why aren't you using your ice and snow to attack me? Chapter 21:14. Why wasn't she using ice and snow against her? The golden snow demon beast almost threw up a mouthful of blood upon hearing this. Did it not want to use ice and snow? That wasn't it. It was because it couldn't use ice and snow at all. The strength of the woman in front of it was too terrifying. Before the battle had even begun, she had already firmly controlled all the ice and snow energy in the surroundings. With its strength, it did not even have the right to use ice and snow in front of this woman. At this moment, the other 2 golden snow demon beasts with divine halos above their heads also pounced toward Shangguan Yi. One of them stabbed its sharp claws toward Shangguan Yi's heart, while the other summoned the power of evil spirits within its body and slammed its palm toward Shangguan Yi's face. However, just as they closed in on Shangguan Yi, their movements suddenly became extremely sluggish, just like the previous snow demon beast. The extremely low temperature and the power of ice and snow caused the space around them to be frozen solid, and even time itself seemed to have slowed to a crawl. The other two golden snow demon beasts had already learned their lesson, and they immediately summoned all of their powers to defend themselves against the onslaught of the power of ice and snow, thereby minimizing the effects of Shangguan Yi's domain. Die! The golden snow demon beast had already stabbed its sharp claws towards Shangguan Yi's heart. Even though it was being restricted, its speed was still extremely fast, enough to crush the vast majority of Dao integration stage super mighty figures. A ripple flashed through Shangguan Yi's icy blue eyes, but she still stood on the spot, as if she couldn't evade in time. Right at this moment, the golden snow demon beast's sharp claws had already punctured Shangguan Yi's body. Ha ha! You're dead! The golden snow demon chortled with glee. Right at this moment, the other golden snow demon beast had already charged toward it with hundreds of millions of evil spirits imbued in its palm. An extremely sinister power of ice and snow swept through the air within a radius of over 500 kilometers, and the wails of ghosts and wolves filled the air, making it feel as if it had been plunged into a realm of ghosts and demons. Shangguan Yi looked up with a cold expression and made a grabbing motion with one hand. The golden snow demon beast was a little perplexed. However, in the next instant, the space around it suddenly cracked open, and the aura of an alternate world surged through the air. 9 ice swords imbued with the purest power of ice and snow appeared from different directions before stabbing toward the snow demon beast at the same time. Everything happened far too quickly. Before it could even unleash a palm strike, its body was pierced through by the 9 ice swords, nailing it to the ground. Just the cold energy released by the swords was enough to freeze the energy it had yet to unleash in its palm strike. Ice calamity, 9 divine punishments. Shangguan Yi spoke in a cold voice. Immediately after, the snow ghost beast seemed to have suffered some extremely terrifying torture. It screamed at the top of its lungs, completely losing the arrogance it had before. The snow ghost beast's sharp claws were still in Shangguan Yi's body, and fear welled up in its heart upon seeing this. How could such a lively woman look like she had her heart pierced through by him? It could not help but stare at the place where its sharp claws had pierced. Sure enough, there was no blood on the wound, only a pile of snowflakes. Shangguan Yi immediately froze the part of her body that was about to be attacked into ice and snow. So the reason why she did it was the snow ghost beast was shocked. It wanted to pull out its claws, but found that they were already frozen and could not be pulled out at all. This scene was so similar. It was just about to emulate the great empress of the snow tribe by severing its arm in an attempt to survive. However, Shangguan Yi's slender fingers were faster than it, and they clamped around its neck in the blink of an eye. An irresistible cold energy began to spread from its neck to its entire body. This cold energy was far too terrifying. It was so powerful that it had completely exceeded the snow ghost beast's imagination. The power of ice and snow that it had always been so proud of, the power that could control all laws of ice and snow, was nothing more than a joke in the face of this terrifying cold energy. How could this be? How could she be so powerful? The snow ghost beast knew that this was the essential cold energy of a god of creation. However, the power of the heavenly Tao shouldn't be much different from the essential power of a god of creation. How could the three of them be crushed to such a state, even when they joined forces? This didn't make any sense. However, it suddenly recalled Shangguan Yi's other identity, the heavenly Tao abomination. If a person was too powerful and posed a huge threat to the heavenly Tao, or if they had inflicted severe damage to the heavenly Tao, they would become a heavenly Tao abomination. Chun Chun of the heaven-crushing sect had become a heavenly Tao abomination when he was cultivating in the Innerverse. In order to avoid being plagued by bad luck, he had to forcefully minimize his presence in order to conceal himself. Could it be that Shangguan Yi was the same type of person as Chun Chun? Just as this thought was running through its mind, Shangguan Yi had already clamped its neck between her fingers, and it crashed viciously into the ground. Boom! Snow and ice exploded. The earth caved in. The snow ghost beast had already been frozen solid, and its body was extremely fragile in the face of Shangguan Yi's attack. Its body was almost torn into pieces, and it wailed in agony. A world of frost and snow. Frosty winds howled. Heaven and earth were still in an uproar. However, everyone from a 4-9 immortal sect felt as if heaven and earth had become extremely quiet. What do? Everything that was unfolding before their eyes was simply too astonishing. The 3 heavenly snow ghost beast gods that had given them a lot of pressure and a sense of peril had all been subdued by Shangguan Yi. Is Pavilion leader Shangguan Yi really that powerful? Sun Yulua was astonished. In his heart, heavenly gods were extremely terrifying beings. Aside from his idols, Enlin and Su Xiaolan, no one in the sect could challenge a heavenly god on their own. However, Shangguan Yi had taken on 3 heavenly gods at once. Su Qingyun blinked her large eyes. That commotion just then, I felt as if heaven and earth were being split apart. Could it be that she has progressed to the god of creation stage? I don't know. I've never seen a god of creation transcending a tribulation. Woof! Dabai wagged his snowy white tail as he admired Shangguan Yi in the distance. She's the reincarnation of the ice matriarch. She's only recovered her strength in a dire situation, so she probably doesn't need to transcend a tribulation. Xiao Tu spoke with an envious expression. Master is really amazing. Even the women you brought back are all amazing. Xiaoza started to flatter him excitedly. It was no secret among the higher-ups of the 4-9 immortal sect that Shangguan Yi was the reincarnation of the ice matriarch. However, she still managed to stun everyone when she displayed her insane power. She didn't kill the 3 snow ghost beasts first. Instead, she used her frosty power to freeze and strip away their energy before torturing them to the point where they wailed in agony. She made her way over to the Great Empress, who only had her torso and limbs left, and embraced her tightly as she sobbed. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I made you suffer.